On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 vanished, with 239 people aboard, becoming aviation's most baffling mystery in the age of satellite surveillance. But MH370 is just one chapter in humanity's long history of unexplained disappearances, vanishings that challenge our understanding and humble our technological confidence. Throughout history, people have disappeared in ways that seem to defy explanation. Entire colonies have vanished from settlements, leaving behind only cryptic clues. Ships have been found adrift and abandoned in calm seas, their crews gone without trace. Expeditions have sailed into the Arctic and never returned. Aircraft have disappeared from radar screens as if they never existed. And individuals have died under circumstances so mysterious that decades of investigation cannot explain them. These disappearances occupy a unique space in human consciousness. They deny us closure, leaving questions that span generations. They challenge our illusion of control, our belief that in the modern world, with all our technology and systems, people simply cannot vanish. Yet they do. The ocean covers 71% of Earth's surface, and we've explored less than 5% of its depths. Vast regions of our planet remain as unknown today as they were centuries ago, capable of swallowing ships, aircraft, and people without leaving evidence we can find. Tonight, we'll explore history's most haunting disappearances. We'll examine the Lost Colony of Roanoke, where 117 English settlers vanished from an island off North Carolina, leaving only a single word carved in wood. We'll follow the Franklin expedition into Arctic ice, where 129 men disappeared for 168 years until modern archaeology finally revealed their fate. We'll board the Mary Celeste, found sailing, perfectly intact but completely abandoned in the Atlantic. We'll investigate the Bermuda Triangle legend and separate scientific fact from sensational fiction. We'll stand on an Australian beach where a man died carrying a cryptic code that remains undeciphered 75 years later. We'll trace the disappearance of USS Cyclops with 309 souls aboard in 1918. And we'll examine MH370's vanishing and the unprecedented search that followed. This exploration is built on decades of research, archaeological discoveries, forensic analysis, and the work of historians, scientists, and investigators who have dedicated their lives to understanding these mysteries. We'll examine the evidence carefully, consider multiple theories fairly, and acknowledge what remains unknown. We'll move thoughtfully through each case, taking time to understand not just what happened, but why these disappearances continue to captivate us, and what they reveal about our relationship with the unknown. This is a journey designed for nighttime listening, unhurried, thoughtful, and perfect for falling asleep, while remaining compelling for those still awake. We'll explore these mysteries with the respect they deserve, honoring those who vanished, and the families who still seek answers. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin this journey into history's most mysterious disappearances. Island of Lost Souls, Roanoke Colony, 1587. What happens when an entire community vanishes without explanation, leaving behind only a single cryptic word carved into wood? This is the question that has haunted historians for over 4 centuries. Ever since 101 English colonists disappeared from Roanoke Island, taking with them one of America's most enduring mysteries. The story begins in the summer of 1587 when 3 small ships carrying hopeful English settlers approached the shores of what is now North Carolina's Outer Banks. Leading them was John White, an artist and gentleman who had visited this coastline before. This was England's second attempt to establish a permanent foothold in the New World, following the failure of an earlier military expedition. But this time, the venture was different. Among the 117 colonists were 17 women and 9 children families seeking a new life across the Atlantic. The location chosen for settlement was Roanoke Island, a narrow strip of land sheltered between the mainland and the barrier islands. It measured roughly 12 miles long and 3 miles wide, covered in dense maritime forest with sandy soil. The Roanoke and Croatan peoples had lived in this region for generations, and relations with the English had been complicated by the previous expedition's violence. Still, White hoped to establish peaceful coexistence. On August 18, 1587, just weeks after landing, White's daughter, Eleanor, gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Virginia Dare, and she became the first English child born in what would become the United States. It should have been a moment of celebration, a symbol of the colony's future. Instead, Virginia Dare would become a ghost, her fate forever unknown. By late summer, the colony faced a critical problem. Supplies were running dangerously low. The settlers had arrived too late in the season to plant crops, and the harvest wouldn't come until the following year. After much debate, the colonists convinced White to return to England for provisions. He was reluctant. Leaving meant abandoning his daughter and newborn granddaughter, but as the colony's governor, he was best positioned to secure support. Before departing, White made an agreement with the settlers. If they needed to relocate, they would carve their destination into a prominent tree or post. If they left under duress or danger, they would mark it with a Maltese cross. White sailed from Roanoke on August 27, 1587, promising to return within months. He could not have known that 3 years would pass before he saw the island again. The delay was not his choice. When White reached England in November, the entire nation was mobilizing for war. Spain's King Philip II was assembling the largest naval fleet the world had ever seen, the Spanish Armada, to invade England and overthrow Queen Elizabeth I. Every seaworthy vessel was commandeered for defense. White made several attempts to return to Roanoke, but each was thwarted by military orders, privateering of ventures or storms. He could only wait and worry, imagining his family struggling through winters without adequate supplies, wondering if his granddaughter was even still alive. Finally, in August 1590, White secured passage on a privateering expedition that agreed to stop at Roanoke. As the ships approached the Outer Banks on August 15th, his granddaughter's 3rd birthday, White saw smoke rising from the island. His hopes lifted. But when the landing party reached the shore, the next day they found the settlement completely abandoned. What White discovered was both orderly and unsettling. The houses had been dismantled methodically, their timbers removed. This was not the scene of a panicked evacuation or violent attack. The colonists had taken time to deconstruct their homes, suggesting a planned relocation. Personal possessions were gone. No clothing tools or furniture remained scattered about. The entire area was overgrown with weeds and vines, indicating the site had been vacant for some time. Then White found the clues. Carved into a post at the entrance to the settlement was a single word, Croatoan. Nearby on a tree trunk, someone had etched the letters, K-R-O. White examined both carvings carefully. There were no Maltese crosses, no signs of distress. According to the agreement, this meant the colonists had left voluntarily and relocated to Croatoan, the island now known as Hatteras, about 50 miles south where the friendly Croatan people lived. White was eager to sail immediately to Croatoan and find his family, but fate intervened once more. A storm was approaching, and the ship's captain refused to risk the dangerous shoals around Hatteras Island. They would return to the Caribbean to resupply, then come back to search. But the storm damaged the ships, forcing them to return to England for repairs. White never made it back to Roanoke. He never learned what happened to his daughter, his granddaughter, or any of the colonists he had left behind. The mystery of the Lost Colony, as it came to be known, has captivated investigators ever since. The most straightforward explanation, that the colonists relocated to Croatoan Island, as the carving indicated, was never properly investigated in White's lifetime. By the time England established its next successful colony at Jamestown in 1607, 17 years had passed. The Jamestown colonists heard rumors from Native Americans about people with European features living among inland tribes, but these reports were never confirmed. Modern archaeology has provided intriguing clues. Excavations at a site called Site X, about 50 miles inland from Roanoke, have uncovered European artifacts dating to the late 16th century, a sword hilt gun, parts and other items that suggest English presence. Another site on Hatteras Island has yielded similar finds, including a signet ring and other personal objects. These discoveries support a theory that the colonists split into smaller groups and integrated with different Native American communities. DNA studies have added another dimension to the investigation. Some members of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, whose oral traditions speak of ancestors with light eyes, who talked in books, show genetic markers consistent with European ancestry. While not conclusive proof, these findings suggest that at least some Roanoke colonists may have survived by joining native communities. Environmental research offers context for why the colonists might have left Roanoke. Tree ring analysis reveals that the region experienced the worst drought in 800 years between 1587 and 1589, precisely when the colony was struggling. Water sources would have dried up, crops would have failed, and tensions with native peoples over scarce resources would have intensified. Relocation may have been a matter of survival. Other theories are darker. Some historians suggest disease decimated the colony. Others propose that conflict with native peoples, perhaps in retaliation for the previous expedition's violence, led to the colonists' deaths. The lack of bodies or signs of violence makes this less likely, but not impossible. Bodies could have been buried, scattered, or lost to time and nature. What makes the Roanoke mystery so compelling is not just the disappearance itself, but what it represents. These were real people, families with children, craftsmen, farmers, dreamers seeking a better life. Eleanor White Dare was a young mother far from home. Virginia Dare was an infant who never knew England. The other colonists, each had names, histories, hopes. Their erasure from history feels particularly poignant because they were so close to being remembered. Had White returned as planned, had the Spanish Armada not disrupted England's colonial efforts, had storms not prevented the search of Croatoan Island, we might know their fates. Instead, we're left with fragments. A word carved in wood artifacts, buried in soil genetic traces and living descendants, and questions that span centuries. The Lost Colony of Roanoke reminds us that even planned disappearances, even communities that intended to leave messages about their whereabouts, can vanish so completely that we're left interpreting shadows. As we explore other mysterious disappearances throughout history, we'll see this pattern repeat: the ocean that swallows ships without trace, the Arctic that preserves and conceals, the sky that claims aircraft. But we begin here on a small island off the Carolina coast where America's first mystery took root, where 117 people stepped out of history and into legend, leaving us to wonder what became of them in the forests and waters of a new world that was for them both promise and oblivion. Chapter 2: Ghosts of the Arctic. The Franklin Expedition of 1845. From a small island off the Carolina coast, we turn now to a vastly different landscape, one of ice darkness and unimaginable cold. While the Roanoke colonists vanished in temperate forests, another group of explorers would disappear into the Arctic, where nature's indifference to human ambition becomes absolute. On May 19, 1845, 2 ships departed Greenhithe, England, amid great fanfare and optimism. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror were not ordinary vessels. They were bomb ships built with reinforced hulls designed to withstand the recoil of heavy mortars, now converted for polar exploration. Each ship had been fitted with steam engines, capable of propelling them at 4 knots, a revolutionary addition that promised to power through ice where sailing ships had failed. Their bows were reinforced with iron plates. Their hulls were doubled with thick planking. Below decks they carried 3 years' worth of provisions, 8,000 tins of preserved meat, 130,000 pounds of tobacco, 200 gallons of wine, and libraries containing over 1,200 books. Leading this expedition was Captain Sir John Franklin, 59 years old, a veteran Arctic explorer who had survived 2 previous expeditions to map Canada's northern coastline. Franklin was a national hero, knighted for his service, though his previous Arctic journey had ended in tragedy when 11 of his men died of starvation. Now he commanded 128 officers and crew, 129 souls in total, on a mission to chart the final unexplored section of the Northwest Passage, the fabled route through the Canadian Arctic that promised a shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The Royal Navy's confidence was absolute. With steam power, reinforced ships, and abundant provisions, Franklin's expedition seemed invincible. The Admiralty expected the ships to complete their mission within 2 years, perhaps 3 at most. As Erebus and Terror sailed down the Thames, crowds gathered to watch. Families waved farewell. No one imagined they were witnessing the beginning of Victorian England's greatest maritime mystery. The ships were last seen by European eyes in late July 1845 when whalers encountered them in Baffin Bay, moored to an iceberg while waiting for conditions to improve. Franklin and his officers appeared in good spirits. They were entering the labyrinth of vast, shifting maze of ice channels, islands, and frozen seas that comprise the Canadian Arctic archipelago. Then they vanished. For the first 2 years there was no concern. Arctic expeditions routinely spent winters, trapped in ice, unable to communicate with the outside world. But by 1847, Franklin's wife, Jane, began pressing the Admiralty to send search parties. By 1848, concern had turned to alarm. The ships should have emerged by now, either having completed the passage or returned the way they came. What followed was the largest rescue operation in history. Between 1848 and 1859, the Royal Navy and private expeditions launched more than 30 search missions, approaching the Arctic from both the Atlantic and Pacific sides. These searches covered vast territories, mapping previously unknown regions, and finally confirming the existence of a navigable Northwest Passage, though not the route Franklin had taken. In 1850, searchers made their first discovery. On Beechy Island, a small barren outcrop in the Canadian Arctic, they found the expedition's first winter camp. 3 graves stood in the permafrost marked with wooden headboards. John Torrington, Royal Marine, died January 1st, 1846, aged 20. John Hartnell, able seaman, died January 4th, 1846, aged 25. William Brain, Royal Marine, died April 3rd, 1846, aged 32. The graves suggested the expedition had wintered here in 1845-46 before continuing westward, but there were no messages, no indication of Franklin's plans or the expedition's condition. The next crucial discovery came in 1854 when Scottish explorer John Rae encountered Inuit people near King William Island who possessed items that had clearly come from Franklin's expedition. Silver spoons forks, a gold watch. Through interpreters, the Inuit told Rae a disturbing story. 4 years earlier, in the spring of 1850, they had encountered approximately 40 white men dragging boats and sledges south across the ice near the mouth of the Back River. The men were thin, exhausted, and starving. Some had died along the way. The Inuit reported finding bodies later, and evidence that suggested the men had resorted to cannibalism in their final days. When Rae returned to England with this testimony, Victorian society reacted with outrage and denial. The idea that British naval officers, gentlemen, would engage in cannibalism was unthinkable. Charles Dickens wrote articles defending Franklin's men, dismissing Inuit testimony as unreliable. The cultural prejudice of the era prevented many from accepting what indigenous witnesses had observed. but what the Inuit described would later be confirmed by physical evidence. Over the following years, search parties found more traces of the expedition. In 1859, a party led by Francis Leopold McClintock discovered a cairn on King William Island, containing the only written record ever found from Franklin's expedition. It was a standard Admiralty form filled out twice. The first entry, dated May 28, 1847, reported that the ships had wintered at Beechey Island in 1845-46, then sailed south and became trapped in ice off King William Island in September 1846. The message was optimistic, all well. But a second message, written in the margins 11 months later, told a different story. Dated April the 25th, 1848, it reported that the ships had been trapped in ice for 19 months. 24 officers and crew had died, including Sir John Franklin, who had passed away on June 11, 1847. The remaining 105 survivors, now under the command of Captain Francis Crozier, were abandoning the ships and attempting to march south toward the Back River and the nearest Hudson's Bay Company outpost, a distance of over 600 miles across one of the harshest environments on Earth. McClintock's party also found a boat mounted on a sledge containing 2 skeletons and a bizarre collection of items: silverware, soap sponges, slippers, books, and chocolate. The boat was pointed back toward the ship, suggesting some men had tried to return. Scattered along the southern coast of King William Island, searchers found more skeletons, more abandoned equipment, and evidence that confirmed the Inuit accounts. For over a century, the physical ships remained lost. Theories about their location proliferated, but the Arctic kept its secrets. Then, in the early 21st century, Canadian researchers launched a systematic search using modern technology. In September 2014, underwater archaeologists using sonar located HMS Erebus in just 11 meters of water in Queen Maud Gulf, south of King William Island. The ship sat upright on the seafloor, remarkably preserved by the cold Arctic waters. 2 years later, in September 2016, Terror was found in Terror Bay, even farther south than Erebus. She too was in extraordinary condition, sitting upright with hatches closed and contents intact. The discoveries revolutionized understanding of the expedition's final chapter. The ships hadn't sunk immediately when abandoned. Someone, perhaps Inuit, who had boarded them, or crew members who had returned, had sailed or drifted them south after the mass abandonment in April 1848. Modern forensic analysis has revealed what killed Franklin's men. In the 1980s, researchers exhumed the bodies of the 3 sailors buried on Beechey Island. The permafrost had preserved them perfectly, allowing detailed examination. Analysis revealed dangerously high levels of lead in their tissues. The source was the tinned food. The expedition's provisions had been sealed using a new, faster method that involved lead solder. As the food sat in the tins, lead leached into the contents. Over months and years, the crew suffered chronic lead poisoning, which causes fatigue, weakness, confusion, and impaired judgment. Combined with lead poisoning were other factors. Scurvy caused by vitamin C deficiency weakened the men's immune systems and caused their teeth to fall out. The tinned food heated during preservation had lost most of its vitamin C content. Tuberculosis was widespread among the crew, as evidenced by lesions on recovered bones. Starvation came last as the men dragged heavy sledges loaded with unnecessary items: silverware, books, soap across the ice, burning calories they couldn't replace. The cut marks found on human bones confirmed what the Inuit had reported, and Victorian England had refused to believe. In their final days, some of Franklin's men did resort to cannibalism. It was not a moral failing, but a desperate attempt to survive in conditions that offered no other choice. The Arctic had defeated them not through a single catastrophe, but through a combination of factors: bad luck and where the ice trapped them, technological failure in how their food was preserved, and decisions made by men whose judgment was impaired by lead poisoning. Franklin's expedition reveals the limits of human preparation against nature's indifference. These men carried the best equipment Victorian technology could provide. They had steam engines, reinforced hulls, 3 years of food, and extensive Arctic experience. Yet they all perished, their ships swallowed by ice, their bodies scattered across hundreds of miles of frozen wasteland. The tragedy was compounded by cultural prejudice. The refusal to credit Inuit testimony meant that crucial information was dismissed for decades, delaying understanding of what had actually happened. The Arctic preserved the expedition's remains for future generations to study, turning tragedy into a time capsule that reveals both the courage and the hubris of 19th century exploration. Today, Parks Canada continues to document and preserve the wrecks of Erebus and Terror, treating them as underwater archaeological sites and grave sites. The ships rest in darkness and cold monuments to 129 men who sought glory and found only ice. From the frozen Arctic, our journey takes us next to warmer waters, where another vessel would be found adrift and abandoned, but under very different circumstances. The ghost ship of the Atlantic, Mary Celeste, 1872. While Franklin's ships disappeared into Arctic ice, leaving no witnesses to their fate, another vessel would be found in very different circumstances, perfectly intact, fully provisioned, yet completely abandoned in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. On the afternoon of December 4th, 1872, Captain David Morehouse stood on the deck of the British brig Dei Gratia, scanning the horizon between the Azores and the Portuguese coast. The weather had been rough for days, but now the seas were calming. Around 1 p.m., the lookout spotted a vessel about 6 miles distant sailing erratically. Through his telescope, Morehouse watched the ship yaw and drift her sails, set oddly, some furled, and others catching wind at awkward angles. She showed no response to signals. As Dei Gratia drew closer, Morehouse felt a growing unease. He recognized the vessel, a 2-masted brigantine he had seen in New York Harbor just weeks earlier. It was the Mary Celeste, a merchant ship that had departed New York on November 7 bound for Genoa with a cargo of commercial alcohol. Morehouse knew her captain, Benjamin Briggs, slightly. They had dined together before their respective departures. The Mary Celeste had left port 8 days before Dei Gratia. Yet here she was, drifting aimlessly, showing no signs of life aboard. Morehouse hailed the vessel repeatedly. No response came. He ordered his first mate, Oliver Devoe, to take 2 men and board her. What they found would become one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. The boarding party climbed aboard a ship that was, in most respects, perfectly sound. The Mary Celeste measured 103 feet in length and 282 tons. She was seaworthy, with no significant damage to her hull or rigging. Below decks, they found the cargo hold containing Weinstallmauer's 701 barrels of denatured alcohol intended for fortifying wine in Italy. 9 barrels were empty, though whether they had been full at departure remained unclear. The ship carried 6 months' worth of food and fresh water. The galley was tidy with pots and pans in their places. In the captain's cabin, Devoe found personal belongings undisturbed. Captain Briggs's navigational instruments were in their cases. His wife's sewing basket sat on a table. A child's toys lay scattered. The Briggses had brought their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, on the voyage. The crew's pipes and tobacco remained in the forecastle, which was unusual. Sailors rarely abandoned ship without their pipes. Valuables, including the ship's chronometer and sextant, were still aboard. If this had been piracy or mutiny, why would the perpetrators leave such items behind? But there were also puzzling details. The ship's single lifeboat was missing, torn from its davits. The last entry in the ship's log was dated November 25th, 9 days earlier, placing the Mary Celeste near the island of Santa Maria in the Azores about 400 miles from where De Gracia found her. A makeshift sounding rod lay on the deck, suggesting someone had recently measured the water level in the ship's hold. One of the pumps had been disassembled. Most of the ship's papers were missing, including the captain's log and navigation documents, though the official logbook remained. The ship had taken on some water, about 3.5 feet in the hold, but this was not unusual for a vessel of her age and posed no immediate danger. The main hatch was open, and both fore and aft hatches were secured. Several sails were set, though others had been furled or blown loose. A frayed rope trailed from the stern into the water. Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their daughter Sophia, and the 7 crew members were gone. No bodies, no blood, no signs of violence or struggle. 10 people had simply vanished from a seaworthy ship in the middle of the ocean. Morehouse faced a decision. Under maritime law, an abandoned vessel could be claimed as salvage, but he needed to bring the Mary Celeste to port to make that claim. He assigned DeVoe and 2 sailors to sail the ghost ship to Gibraltar, the nearest British port, while De Gracia followed. For the next 12 days, the skeleton crew navigated the Mary Celeste across 600 miles of ocean, arriving in Gibraltar on December 13th. What should have been a straightforward salvage case became a 3-month investigation. The Gibraltar Vice Admiralty Court, presided over by Sir James Cochrane, suspected foul play. The substantial salvage award at stake, the Mary Celeste and her cargo were worth approximately 46,000 Jordan ABOUT, $46,000, about $0.2 million in today's currency, provided motive for fraud. Had Morehouse and Briggs conspired to abandon the ship so Morehouse could claim salvage? Had De Gracia's crew murdered the Mary Celeste's occupants? The court's surveyor, Thomas Flood, examined the ship thoroughly. He reported finding what appeared to be bloodstains on the deck and sword marks on the railings. Chemical analysis later revealed the bloodstains were rust and cargo residue, and the sword marks were normal wear. Flood also noted the missing lifeboat and the disassembled pump. The Attorney General, Frederick Solly Flood, was convinced of conspiracy, but after 3 months of investigation, no evidence of crime emerged. The court eventually awarded De Gracia's crew 1/6 of the Mary Celeste's value as salvage, far less than the customary 1/3 to 1/2, reflecting lingering suspicion. The Mary Celeste was returned to service, but her reputation was ruined. Sailors considered her cursed. She changed hands 17 times over the next 13 years, each owner losing money. In 1885, her final owner deliberately wrecked her on a reef off Haiti in a failed insurance fraud scheme. The ship that had survived her mysterious abandonment was destroyed by human greed. But what had happened to Captain Briggs and his crew? In the 152 years since the Mary Celeste was found, dozens of theories have been proposed. Piracy seemed unlikely, nothing of value was taken. Mutiny was improbable. Briggs was known as a fair captain, and he had chosen his crew carefully. Several were experienced sailors he had worked with before. Insurance fraud made no sense. Briggs owned a share of the ship and cargo and would lose money by abandoning them. Natural phenomena offered more plausible explanations. Some theorized a waterspout, a tornado, over water had frightened the crew into abandoning ship, though waterspouts rarely occur in the Azores in November, and the ship showed no damage consistent with such an event. Others suggested a seaquake, an underwater earthquake that can create sudden violent water movements. This might explain the disassembled pump and the sounding rod. Perhaps the crew felt a jolt and feared the ship was taking on water rapidly. The most compelling theory involves the cargo itself. The Mary Celeste carried 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol, a highly volatile substance. 9 barrels were found empty. Modern analysis suggests that alcohol vapors could have escaped through these barrels, particularly if they were poorly sealed or had been damaged during rough weather. In the confined space of the hold, vapors would accumulate. If someone opened the main hatch, the sudden release of vapor could create a dramatic, frightening effect. A visible cloud of fumes, possibly accompanied by a popping sound, as pressure equalized. To a crew already anxious after days of rough weather, this could have appeared to be the prelude to an explosion. Captain Briggs, fearing his ship was about to blow up with his wife and child aboard, may have ordered everyone into the lifeboat as a precaution. They might have attached a rope to the Mary Celeste, intending to stand off at a safe distance and return once they determined there was no danger. But if the rope frayed and broke, as the trailing rope found on the ship suggests, the lifeboat would have drifted away. The Mary Celeste, still under partial sail, would have moved faster than a lifeboat could row. The crew would have watched helplessly as their ship sailed away, leaving them adrift in the Atlantic. A lifeboat designed for 10 people, overloaded and in rough seas, would have had little chance of reaching land. The nearest shore was Santa Maria Island, about 400 miles away. No wreckage or bodies were ever found, but the Atlantic rarely returns what it takes. This theory explains the evidence: the missing lifeboat, the open hatch, the disassembled pump. Perhaps they were checking for water before the vapor incident. The missing ship's papers. Briggs would have taken crucial documents with him. The orderly state of the ship, no panic, just a calculated evacuation. And the set sails, the ship continued sailing after being abandoned. It also explains why experienced sailors would make what appears to be a fatal error. They were reacting to a perceived immediate threat to their lives. Yet we cannot be certain. The Mary Celeste's mystery endures precisely because the evidence supports multiple interpretations. We know the crew abandoned a seaworthy ship. We know they took the lifeboat. We know they never reached safety. Everything else is inference and speculation. The Mary Celeste has become maritime legend, inspiring countless stories, novels and films, most of which bear little resemblance to the actual facts. The real story is both simpler and more haunting than fiction. 10 people made a decision in a moment of fear, and that decision cost them their lives. The ship they abandoned to save themselves sailed on without them, a floating monument to a tragedy born not from disaster, but from the terrible irony of misperceived danger. Our next mystery takes us to a region that has become synonymous with disappearance itself, where the Mary Celeste story would eventually be woven into a larger tapestry of vanishings. The Bermuda Triangle, the Bermuda legend begins. The Mary Celeste story would eventually become woven into a larger narrative of maritime mystery, one centered on a specific region of ocean that has captured imaginations for decades. We turn now to examine how a busy shipping lane became the world's most infamous zone of disappearances. The Bermuda Triangle, as it's known today, encompasses roughly 500,000 square miles of Atlantic Ocean, forming a loosely defined triangular area between Miami, Florida, Bermuda, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. This is one of the most heavily traveled maritime regions in the world, with countless ships and aircraft passing through daily, carrying cargo and passengers between the Americas, Europe, and the Caribbean. Yet this ordinary stretch of ocean has become synonymous with the unexplained, a place where vessels and aircraft allegedly vanish without trace, swallowed by forces that defy rational explanation. The legend did not emerge from ancient maritime folklore or centuries-old sailors' tales. Instead, it's a distinctly 20th century phenomenon, born from a combination of genuine tragedies, sensational journalism, and humanity's persistent desire to find patterns in randomness. Understanding how the Bermuda Triangle myth developed requires examining both the real incidents that occurred and the way those incidents were interpreted, embellished, and transformed into legend. The story begins not with the triangle itself, but with a single devastating disappearance that would later be retroactively incorporated into the legend. On March 4, 1918, during World War I, the USS Cyclops departed Barbados, bound for Baltimore, carrying 800 tons of manganese ore, and 309 crew and passengers. The Cyclops was a massive Navy collier, a coal-carrying vessel, stretching 542 feet long. She never reached her destination. No distress signal was received. No wreckage was ever found. All 309 souls aboard simply vanished, making it the single largest loss of life in U.S. naval history not involving combat. The Cyclops' disappearance was genuinely mysterious and remains unsolved to this day. Theories ranged from German submarine attack, though the U-boats typically left survivors or debris, to structural failure from overloading, to spontaneous explosion of the volatile manganese cargo. The Navy's official conclusion was simply, lost at sea, cause unknown. What made the incident even more puzzling was that two of Cyclops' sister ships, Proteus and Nereus, also vanished without trace in the same general area in 1941, suggesting a possible design flaw that made these vessels vulnerable to catastrophic failure. But the Cyclops disappeared in 1918, and for decades afterward, the region between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico was simply known as a busy shipping lane where, like all maritime regions, accidents occasionally happened. The transformation into a zone of supernatural mystery would not begin for another 46 years. In February 1964, a writer named Vincent Gaddis published an article in Argosy magazine titled "The Deadly Bermuda Triangle." This was the first time the term Bermuda Triangle appeared in print. Gaddis cataloged a series of disappearances in the region, including the Cyclops, and several aircraft, and suggested that the area possessed unusual properties that caused vessels to vanish. The article captured public imagination, but it was just the beginning. The legend truly crystallized a decade later with the publication of Charles Berlitz's 1974 bestseller, The Bermuda Triangle. Berlitz, a linguist and writer fascinated by unexplained phenomena, compiled dozens of cases of ships and aircraft that had allegedly disappeared mysteriously in the Triangle. He claimed that over 1,000 lives had been lost in the previous century under inexplicable circumstances. The book became a massive international bestseller, translated into dozens of languages, selling millions of copies, and cementing the Bermuda Triangle in popular consciousness. Berlitz's book was compelling, dramatic, and deeply flawed. He attributed the disappearances to a dizzying array of explanations: magnetic anomalies that caused compasses to malfunction, time warps, portals to other dimensions, technology from the lost city of Atlantis, and extraterrestrial activity. Each case was presented as genuinely mysterious, with crucial details often omitted or altered to enhance the sense of inexplicable danger. But when skeptical researchers began investigating Berlitz's claims, a very different picture emerged. Lawrence David Kusha, a research librarian and pilot, spent years tracking down the original sources for the incidents Berlitz described. His findings, published in the 1975 book, The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved, systematically dismantled the legend. Kusha discovered that many of the mysterious disappearances had straightforward explanations that Berlitz had omitted. Ships described as vanishing in calm seas had actually disappeared during severe storms. Aircraft that allegedly vanished without distress calls had in fact reported mechanical problems before going down. Some incidents, Berlitz included, had occurred hundreds of miles outside the Triangle's boundaries. Several cases had been significantly embellished. Details added, timelines altered, or circumstances changed to make them seem more mysterious. Most remarkably, some incidents Berlitz described had never happened at all. They were complete fabrications or misidentifications. Kusha also examined the statistical question: did the Bermuda Triangle actually have an unusually high rate of disappearances? He compared the number of incidents in the Triangle to other equally busy maritime regions, adjusting for traffic volume. His conclusion was unambiguous. The Bermuda Triangle showed no higher rate of disappearances than any other heavily traveled area of ocean. The U.S. Coast Guard and Navy reached the same conclusion. In their official statements, both organizations noted that the number of incidents in the triangle was proportional to the amount of traffic passing through, and that most disappearances had mundane explanations involving whether human error or mechanical failure. This is not to say the region is without hazards. The Bermuda Triangle presents several genuine dangers that can explain some disappearances. The Gulf Stream, one of the world's strongest ocean currents, flows through the area at speeds up to 5.6 miles per hour. It can quickly disperse wreckage and debris, carrying evidence hundreds of miles from the actual incident site. This makes recovery operations difficult and can create the impression that vessels have vanished without trace, when in reality, their remains have simply been scattered. The region is also prone to sudden violent weather changes. The Caribbean and Western Atlantic experience frequent tropical storms and hurricanes, particularly from June through November. These storms can develop rapidly, giving vessels little warning. Waterspouts tornadoes that form over water occur regularly in the area. While typically less powerful than land tornadoes, they can still pose serious danger to small boats and aircraft. The area's geography includes some of the deepest underwater trenches in the Atlantic Ocean, including the Puerto Rico Trench, which reaches depths of over 8,000 meters. Wreckage sinking into these abyssal depths would be virtually impossible to locate with conventional search methods, especially given the technology available in the mid-20th century when many of the famous disappearances occurred. The region also experiences magnetic variations areas, where compass readings differ from true north due to local magnetic anomalies. While these variations are well documented on nautical charts and pilots are trained to account for them, they could cause navigational errors for inexperienced mariners, particularly in the pre-GPS era. What the scientific investigation reveals is that the Bermuda Triangle is simply an ordinary, if busy and occasionally hazardous, stretch of ocean. The disappearances that have occurred there are tragic but explicable. Ships sink in storms. Aircraft crash due to mechanical failure or pilot error. Wreckage sinks into deep water or is dispersed by currents. These are the mundane realities of maritime and aviation accidents occurring in the Triangle at rates no different from anywhere else. Yet the legend persists. Even today, decades after Cush's debunking, the Bermuda Triangle remains a cultural touchstone referenced in films, books, and television shows. New disappearances in the region still generate headlines suggesting mysterious forces at work, even when investigations reveal ordinary causes. Why does the myth endure despite overwhelming evidence against it? The answer lies in human psychology. We are pattern-seeking creatures evolved to find connections and meaning in the world around us. When multiple incidents occur in the same general area, even if that area is enormous and heavily trafficked, our minds perceive a pattern. The Bermuda Triangle legend provided a framework for understanding these incidents, a narrative that transformed random tragedies into parts of a larger mystery. This narrative is more emotionally satisfying than the truth that accidents happen, that the ocean is dangerous, and that sometimes people die for mundane reasons, like bad weather or mechanical failure. The legend also reflects our relationship with the unknown. The ocean, despite centuries of navigation and modern technology, remains largely unexplored. We've mapped more of the moon's surface than the ocean floor. This vast unknown territory invites speculation and imagination. The idea that there might be regions where the normal rules don't apply, where ships and planes can simply vanish, speaks to both our fears and our fascination with mystery. The Bermuda Triangle illustrates how compelling narratives can overshadow statistical reality, how sensational claims can persist despite thorough debunking, and how human pattern-seeking can transform ordinary tragedy into extraordinary mystery. It reminds us to approach claims of the unexplained with healthy skepticism, to demand evidence, and to remember that the truth, while often less dramatic than legend, is ultimately more valuable. The Triangle's most famous case would occur in 1945 when 5 military aircraft vanished during a routine training mission, cementing the region's reputation and providing the legend with its most enduring mystery. Flight 19, the year the plane disappeared, 1945. The Bermuda Triangle legend needed a defining case, an incident so mysterious and well documented that it would cement the region's reputation for decades to come. That case arrived on December 5, 1945, when 5 military aircraft vanished during what should have been a routine afternoon training flight. Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, Florida was bustling with activity that Wednesday afternoon. World War II had ended just 3 months earlier, and the base was transitioning from wartime operations to peacetime training. At 2:10 p.m., 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers taxied down the runway and lifted into the clear December sky. The mission-designated Flight 19 was a standard navigation training exercise that instructor pilots had flown countless times before. The TBM Avenger was a robust aircraft, the U.S. Navy's primary torpedo bomber during the war. Each plane carried a 3-man crew pilot, turret gunner, and radio man. The 5 aircraft of Flight 19 carried 14 men. In total, one plane had only a 2-man crew. Leading the formation was Lieutenant Charles Taylor, an experienced pilot with over 2,500 flight hours and combat experience in the Pacific Theater. Taylor had recently transferred to Fort Lauderdale from Naval Air Station Miami and was serving as the instructor for this training mission, though he was unfamiliar with the area's geography. The flight plan was straightforward and had been executed hundreds of times without incident. The formation would fly east from Fort Lauderdale for 56 miles to Hens and Chickens Shoals near the Bahamas, where they would conduct practice bombing runs on a decommissioned ship hulk. After bombing practice, they would fly north for 67 miles, then turn southwest and return to base, a triangular route that would take approximately 2 hours. Weather conditions were favorable: clear skies, good visibility, light winds. It should have been an unremarkable training flight. The mission proceeded normally through the bombing practice. Around 3:45 p.m., however, the tower at Fort Lauderdale received a troubling radio transmission. It was not Flight 19's scheduled check-in, but rather an internal communication between the flight's aircraft that had been overheard. Lieutenant Taylor was speaking to his crew, and he sounded confused. Both of his compasses had apparently malfunctioned. The gyroscopic compass was tumbling, and the magnetic compass was giving erratic readings. Without reliable instruments, Taylor was attempting to navigate by visual landmarks, but nothing looked familiar. "I don't know where we are," Taylor transmitted. "We must have got lost after that last turn." Another voice, believed to be one of the student pilots, suggested that they appeared to be over the Florida Keys. Taylor seemed to agree with this assessment, though, if accurate, it would mean they had somehow flown far south of their intended position. The problem was that they weren't over the Keys at all. They were almost certainly near the Bahamas, exactly where they should have been. The tower at Fort Lauderdale attempted to establish clear communication with Flight 19, but radio conditions were deteriorating. Transmissions were intermittent and often garbled. What came through painted a picture of growing confusion and concern. Taylor reported that the ocean didn't look right. The water below appeared different from what he expected. This observation, later sensationalized in Bermuda Triangle literature as evidence of supernatural phenomena, likely reflected Taylor's disorientation. The waters around the Bahamas are distinctly different in color from those off the Florida coast, clearer and more turquoise due to the shallow limestone bottom. But Taylor, unfamiliar with the area, may have found this disconcerting rather than helpful. As the afternoon progressed, the situation deteriorated. The tower suggested that Taylor fly west, which would bring the flight back to the Florida coast, regardless of their exact position. But Taylor, convinced they were already west of Florida over the Gulf of Mexico, refused. He apparently believed that flying west would take them further out to sea. Instead, he ordered the flight to head northeast, believing this would bring them back to land. If Taylor's assessment of their position had been correct, this would have been the right decision. But it wasn't correct, and flying northeast took the formation further out over the Atlantic Ocean, away from land. Radio operators at several bases monitored the increasingly desperate transmissions. Other pilots in the air tried to establish contact and provide assistance. The communications revealed Taylor's growing frustration and the mounting concern among his crew. At one point, Taylor apparently attempted to hand over command to one of the other pilots, Captain George Stivers, who had more experience in the Fort Lauderdale area. But the leadership transfer was never completed, and Taylor remained in command. As the sun began to set around 5:30 p.m., the situation became critical. The Avengers had been airborne for over 3 hours and would soon exhaust their fuel. The last clear transmission from Flight 19 came around 7 p.m. Taylor's voice, barely audible through static, indicated they would ditch when the first aircraft ran out of fuel. After that silence, the Navy immediately launched a massive search and rescue operation. A Martin Mariner flying boat, designated Training 49, took off from Naval Air Station Banana River with a crew of 13 to search for the missing Avengers. 23 minutes after takeoff at 7:50 p.m., the Mariner radioed a routine position report. That was the last communication ever received from Training 49. A merchant ship, the SS Gaines Mills, reported seeing an explosion in the sky at approximately 7:50 p.m. in the area where the Mariner should have been. The Navy concluded that Training 49 had exploded in flight, likely due to fuel vapor ignition, a known hazard with the Martin Mariner, which had earned the nickname Flying Gas Tank due to fuel leaks that created explosive vapor in the aircraft. The Mariner's wreckage was never recovered, but oil slicks were spotted in the area the following day. The search for Flight 19 expanded into one of the largest air-sea rescue operations in history at that time. Over the following days, hundreds of aircraft and dozens of ships scoured 250,000 square miles of ocean. They found nothing, no wreckage, no oil slicks, no life rafts, no bodies. The 5 Avengers and their 14 crew members had vanished completely. The Navy's official investigation, completed in 1946, concluded that the flight had become lost due to Taylor's confusion about their position. His decision to fly northeast, combined with deteriorating weather conditions and fuel exhaustion, led the aircraft far out over the Atlantic. The report suggested the planes ran out of fuel and ditched in the ocean, likely sinking quickly in rough seas. The Board of Investigation initially placed responsibility on Taylor for the disaster, but his mother successfully petitioned to have the report amended. The final conclusion stated simply that the cause was unknown, as no physical evidence had been recovered. Modern analysis, with the benefit of hindsight and additional information, suggests what likely happened. Taylor, having recently transferred from Miami, may have mistaken the island chain of the Bahamas for the Florida Keys, which have a similar appearance from the air. This misidentification would explain his belief that they were west of Florida when they were actually east. His decision to fly northeast, the correct course, if they had been over the Keys, took them deeper into the Atlantic instead of toward safety. Several factors contributed to the tragedy. Taylor's compass failures, while unusual, were not impossible. The gyroscopic compass could malfunction, and magnetic compasses could be affected by electrical interference or the aircraft's metal structure. His unfamiliarity with the local geography meant he couldn't recognize landmarks that would have revealed their true position. The deteriorating radio conditions prevented clear communication with the tower, which might have resolved the confusion. The approaching darkness eliminated visual navigation, and perhaps most critically, Taylor's conviction that he knew where they were prevented him from accepting guidance that would have saved them. The disappearance of Flight 19, combined with the loss of the rescue aircraft, resulted in the deaths of 27 men. For their families, the lack of physical evidence made the loss even more difficult to bear. There were no bodies to bury, No wreckage to examine, no final moments to understand, just silence and absence. Flight 19 became the centerpiece of Bermuda Triangle mythology. The incident seemed to have all the elements of an inexplicable mystery, multiple aircraft vanishing simultaneously, experienced pilots becoming disoriented compasses, malfunctioning, strange radio transmissions about the ocean, looking wrong, and a complete absence of wreckage. When Charles Berlitz wrote about Flight 19, his 1974 book, he omitted or downplayed the evidence of Taylor's confusion, the compass problems, and the logical explanation for the disappearance. Instead, he emphasized the mysterious elements, suggesting supernatural or extraterrestrial involvement. But the truth, while less sensational, is more instructive. Flight 19 demonstrates how a cascade of ordinary problems, equipment, failure, human error, poor communication, bad luck with timing, can combine to create a tragedy that appears inexplicable. It shows how disorientation can affect even experienced pilots, how conviction in a wrong belief can lead to fatal decisions, and how the ocean's vastness can swallow evidence completely. The incident also reveals the human cost behind the legend. These were not anonymous victims of mysterious forces, but real people with names, families, and futures. Lieutenant Charles Taylor was 32 years old, a decorated combat veteran. Captain George Stivers was 27, recently married. The youngest crew member was 19. Each had survived the World War II, only to die in a peacetime training accident that would be transformed into legend. The families of Flight 19's crew members spent years seeking answers, hoping for closure that never came. Some clung to theories that their loved ones had survived, perhaps landing on a remote island or being picked up by a passing ship. But as years became decades, hope faded into acceptance of a loss without resolution. Flight 19 remains the Bermuda Triangle's most famous case, the incident most often cited as evidence of the region's mysterious properties. Yet it's also the case that best demonstrates how the legend was constructed by emphasizing mystery while downplaying explanation, by focusing on the inexplicable while ignoring the mundane, and by transforming human tragedy into supernatural entertainment. The 5 Avengers rest somewhere on the Atlantic floor, their exact location unknown. Several wrecks have been found over the years, and initially identified as Flight 19, only to be revealed as other aircraft. The search continues, occasionally driven by historians and families seeking closure. But the ocean keeps its secrets, and Flight 19 remains lost. A reminder that sometimes the most ordinary explanations, confusion, error, bad luck, can lead to the most extraordinary mysteries. From the skies above the Atlantic, we turn next to a mystery on land, where a man's identity itself would become the central question. The Man with No Name, the Somerton Mystery, 1948, while Flight 19 vanished into the ocean, leaving no trace. Our next mystery involves a man who was found examined and photographed, yet remained as unknown as if he had never existed at all. Sometimes the most profound disappearances happen not in remote oceans or frozen wastelands, but in plain sight. On the evening of December 1st, 1948, several people noticed a well-dressed man sitting against the seawall at Somerton Beach, a popular stretch of coastline just south of Adelaide, Australia. It was a warm summer evening, and beachgoers were enjoying the pleasant weather. The man appeared to be resting, perhaps sleeping off too much drink. His legs were extended, his feet crossed his head, leaning against the wall. One witness saw him raise his right arm, then let it fall. No one thought much of it. People often dozed on the beach. The next morning, December 2nd, the man was still there in the same position. Now people realized something was wrong. Police were called at 6:30 a.m. The man was dead and had been for several hours. He appeared to be in his 40s, approximately 5 feet 11 inches tall, with hazel eyes, ginger-colored hair, tinged with gray and a distinctive high forehead. He was well-built, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, suggesting physical fitness. His hands were notably soft, indicating he didn't perform manual labor. His clothing told a story of careful attention. A white shirt, a red and blue tie, a brown knitted pullover, a gray and brown double-breasted jacket, gray trousers, socks, and polished shoes. Everything was clean and in good condition. But when police searched his pockets, they found almost nothing useful for identification. There was a used bus ticket from Adelaide to Somerton Beach, an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a pack of chewing gum, and some matches. No wallet, no identification, no money beyond a few coins. Most remarkably, every clothing label had been carefully removed, not torn out hastily, but cut away with precision. The autopsy conducted by pathologist Sir John Cleland revealed puzzling findings. The man appeared healthy with no signs of violence or injury. Yet his internal organs told a different story. His spleen was enlarged to about 3 times normal size. His liver was congested with blood. His stomach was also congested and contained his last meal, a pasty which was largely undigested, suggesting death had come suddenly. Blood had pooled in his organs in a pattern consistent with poisoning. His pupils were unusually small, yet toxicology tests found no trace of any known poison. The cause of death was listed as unknown. Possibly heart failure, possibly poisoning by a substance that left no detectable trace. Police launched an investigation, circulating the dead man's photograph and description. No one came forward to identify him. His fingerprints were checked against records in Australia, and abroad no matches. His dental work was examined. It was of good quality, but didn't match any known patient records. Investigators checked missing persons reports, nothing fit. The man seemed to have no past, no identity, no connection to anyone. Then in January 1949, nearly 2 months after the death, a detective conducting a final examination of the man's clothing made a discovery. Sewn into a small hidden pocket in the waistband of the trousers was a tiny rolled piece of paper. When unrolled, it bore 2 words printed in an ornate script, Tamam Shud. Linguists identified the phrase as Persian, meaning ended or finished. More specifically, these were the final words of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a 12th century collection of Persian poetry that had been translated into English and become popular in the early 20th century. The discovery transformed the investigation. Police appealed to the public. Did anyone have a copy of the Rubaiyat, with its final page torn out? In late July 1949, a man came forward. He preferred to remain anonymous then and has never been publicly identified, but he reported finding a rare edition of the Rubaiyat in the back seat of his car, which had been parked near Somerton Beach around the time of the death. The book's final page containing Tamam Shud had been torn out. The tear matched the scrap found on the body, but this discovery raised more questions than it answered. In the back cover of the book, investigators found faint pencil markings, a local phone number, and 5 lines of handwritten capital letters that appeared to be some kind of code. Badar Gobabdu, Emliawi, WTB Panetti, Emlia Boaya Kusing, ETTM Samstigab. The letters seemed random, following no obvious pattern. Cryptographers and code breakers examined them extensively. Some suggested it might be an acrostic with the first letter of each line spelling a message. Others proposed it was a substitution cipher or a one-time pad. Despite decades of analysis by professionals and amateurs alike, no one has definitively cracked the code if it is indeed a code and not simply random letters or abbreviations meaningful only to the writer. The phone number led to a woman living in Glenelg, not far from Somerton Beach. When police interviewed her, she denied knowing the dead man. When shown his photograph, she appeared shocked, but maintained she had never seen him before. Police believed she was not being entirely truthful, but they had no evidence to contradict her statement. Witnesses later reported that she had known a man who matched the Somerton man's description during World War II, and that this man had given her a copy of the Rubaiyat. She refused to elaborate, and police couldn't compel her to provide more information. Investigators also located a brown suitcase at Adelaide railway station that appeared to belong to the dead man. It had been checked into storage on November 30th, the day before his death. The suitcase contained clothing shirts, trousers, a dressing gown, and all the labels had been removed just like the clothes on the body. Also in the suitcase were a screwdriver, scissors, a stenciling brush, and a knife. The stenciling brush suggested the man might have worked in a trade requiring such tools, perhaps ship identification or cargo marking. But this too led nowhere. Over the decades, theories proliferated. Some suggested the Somerton man was a spy, perhaps involved in Cold War espionage. Australia in 1948 was hosting British nuclear testing programs, and Adelaide had strategic importance. The removed labels, the code, the mysterious woman, all could fit an intelligence operative. Others proposed he was a jilted lover who had poisoned himself near the home of a woman who had rejected him. The undigested pasty might have contained the poison. The Tamam Shud scrap could have been a poetic farewell message. Some theorized he was a refugee or displaced person from post-war Europe traveling under an assumed identity who had died of natural causes and whose past was simply lost in the chaos of the era. The removed labels might have been an attempt to obscure his origin. Others suggested he was murdered perhaps by Soviet agents or criminal organizations with the body staged to look like natural death. For 73 years, a Somerton man remained unidentified, becoming one of forensic science's most frustrating mysteries. His body was embalmed and buried, but a plaster cast was made of his head and upper body, preserving his features for future identification attempts. As DNA technology developed, researchers hoped genetic analysis might solve the mystery. In 2021, a breakthrough finally came. Professor Derek Abbott of the University of Adelaide, who had spent years researching the case, worked with genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick to analyze DNA extracted from hairs preserved in the plaster cast. Using genetic genealogy, the same technique that had identified the Golden State Killer, they traced the Somerton man's family tree. The analysis identified him as Charles Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker, born in Melbourne in 1905. Webb had married in 1941, but the marriage had ended, and he had apparently lived a transient life afterward. He had no criminal record, no obvious connection to espionage, no clear reason to remove his clothing labels or carry cryptic codes. The identification answered the question of who he was, but deepened the mystery of why he died and what the strange clues meant. The code remains undeciphered. The woman's connection to him remains unclear. The cause of death remains officially unknown. The Tamam Shud message, whether suicide note, romantic gesture, or something else entirely, remains open to interpretation. Even knowing his name, Charles Webb remains in many ways as mysterious as when he was simply the Somerton man. The case reveals something profound about identity and mystery. We often assume that knowing someone's name means knowing who they are. But Charles Webb's identification demonstrates that a name is just a label, a starting point. The real mystery of the Somerton man was never just his identity. It was his story, his motivations, his final hours, and the meaning behind the clues he left. These remain unknown, perhaps unknowable. The case also demonstrates the limits of forensic science. Despite autopsy, toxicology, fingerprinting dental records, DNA analysis, and decades of investigation, crucial questions remain unanswered. When someone deliberately erases their traces, removing labels carrying no identification, leaving cryptic rather than clear messages, they can remain mysterious even when found, examined, and eventually named. The Somerton Man case has inspired countless theories, books, documentaries, and investigations. It has become Australia's most famous cold case, a puzzle that seems designed to resist solution. Perhaps that was Charles Webb's intention to exit life, as mysteriously as he apparently lived it, leaving behind just enough clues to tantalize, but not enough to explain. From a single unidentified man on an Australian beach, we return to the ocean where an entire ship would vanish in circumstances that echo the mysteries we've already explored. The Great Sea, USS Cyclops, 1918. We've seen how individuals can vanish, leaving behind cryptic clues and unanswered questions. But what happens when an entire ship, a massive vessel, carrying over 300 souls, disappears without sending a single distress call, without leaving a single piece of wreckage? The USS Cyclops was not a vessel that could easily be overlooked. She stretched 542 feet from bow to stern, displacing 19,360 tons when fully loaded. As a collier, a ship designed to transport coal, she was built for capacity rather than speed, with enormous cargo holds that could carry 10,000 tons of fuel. Her profile was distinctive, a long, low hull with a single tall smokestack and two large cargo cranes amidships. She was commissioned in 1910 and had spent 8 years serving the Navy, reliably refueling warships across the Atlantic and Caribbean. In February 1918, with World War I in its final year, the Cyclops received orders to sail from Norfolk, Virginia, to Brazil. Her mission was to deliver coal to British ships operating in the South Atlantic, then return with a cargo of manganese or a critical material for steel production and the war effort. On February 16th, she departed Rio de Janeiro with 10,800 tons of manganese ore in her holds, considerably more than her designed capacity of 10,000 tons. The ship was overloaded, riding low in the water, but this was wartime and efficiency often took precedence over caution. Commanding the Cyclops was Captain George W. Worley, a German-born, naturalized American citizen whose original name was Johann Friedrich Georg Wichmann. Worley was an eccentric figure, known for wearing a derby hat and long underwear on the bridge, regardless of weather, and for keeping a canary in his cabin. His German origins had raised questions about his loyalty during the war, though there was no evidence of disloyalty. He was 55 years old and had served in the Navy for years, but some officers found him difficult to work with. The Cyclops carried not just her crew of 236 sailors, but also 73 passengers, mostly sailors being transported between assignments, along with several civilians. Among the passengers was the American Consul General to Brazil and his family. In total, 309 people were aboard when the ship departed Rio de Janeiro, heading north towards Baltimore. The voyage proceeded without reported incident until March 3rd, when the Cyclops made an unscheduled stop in Barbados. This was unusual, but not unprecedented. Captains had discretion to put into port if conditions warranted. When questioned by British naval authorities in Barbados, Captain Worley reported no problems, though he did mention that one of the ship's 2 engines was inoperable and had been shut down. He also noted that the ship was overloaded. Despite these concerns, he indicated his intention to proceed to Baltimore. On March 4th, 1918, the USS Cyclops departed Barbados, heading northwest into the Atlantic. She was never seen again. When the Cyclops failed to arrive in Baltimore by her expected date, there was initial concern but not immediate alarm. Ships were sometimes delayed by weather mechanical problems or routing changes. But as days passed with no word, concern turned to worry and worry to dread. The Navy began checking with ports along the East Coast and in the Caribbean. Had the Cyclops diverted somewhere? Had she put into port with mechanical trouble? No one had seen her. No distress signal had been received, not by any shore station, not by any ship at sea. The Navy launched an extensive search operation, dispatching vessels to scour the Cyclops' probable route. They found nothing. No wreckage, no debris, no oil slicks, no lifeboats, no bodies. The Atlantic had swallowed the massive ship and 309 people without leaving a trace. On June 1, 1918, nearly 3 months after her departure from Barbados, the USS Cyclops was officially declared lost with all hands. The disappearance sparked immediate speculation and investigation. This was wartime, and German U-boats were actively hunting Allied shipping in the Atlantic. Had the Cyclops been torpedoed? It seemed possible, but several factors argued against it. U-boats typically surfaced after sinking a ship to question survivors, and often allowed them to board lifeboats before attacking. They also usually reported their kills. German naval records examined after the war showed no U-boat claiming the Cyclops. Additionally, a torpedo attack would likely have given the ship time to send a distress signal, and survivors and lifeboats might have been spotted. Could Captain Worley, with his German background, have deliberately sailed the ship to Germany as an act of sabotage or defection? This theory gained traction among some, but it had serious flaws. The Cyclops overloaded, and with one engine inoperable, could barely make 10 knots, far too slow to cross the Atlantic to Germany while evading Allied patrols. Moreover, the ship carried manganese ore, valuable to the Allies, but not particularly useful to Germany, which had its own sources. And if Worley had intended defection, why stop in Barbados and announce his destination? The most likely explanation, maritime experts suggested, was structural failure. The Cyclops was overloaded by 800 tons. She was operating with only one engine, creating uneven stress on her hull. The manganese ore cargo was extremely dense and heavy, concentrated in the holds in ways that could create dangerous stress points. If the ship encountered heavy seas and March in the North Atlantic can produce severe storms, the combination of overloading, uneven engine power, and wave action could have caused catastrophic structural failure. In such a scenario, the ship might have broken apart suddenly, perhaps splitting amidships where the cargo holds created the greatest stress. If the break was catastrophic enough, the ship could have sunk in minutes too quickly for any distress signal to be sent. The crew and passengers would have had no time to launch lifeboats. The wreckage sinking in deep water would have been impossible to locate with 1918 technology. This theory gained considerable support from a chilling coincidence. The Cyclops had 3 sister ships, all built to the same design: Proteus, Nereus, and Jupiter. In 1941, 23 years after the Cyclops disappeared, the Proteus departed the U.S. Virgin Islands, carrying bauxite ore, heading for the United States. She vanished without trace in the same general area where the Cyclops was lost. 1 month later, the Nereus departed the Virgin Islands, also carrying bauxite ore, also heading for the United States. She too vanished without trace in the same region. No wreckage from either ship was ever found. The loss of 3 sister ships in the same area, all carrying heavy ore cargoes, strongly suggests a design flaw that made these vessels vulnerable to catastrophic structural failure when heavily loaded in rough seas. The 4th sister ship, Jupiter, was converted into the aircraft carrier USS Langley and survived until 1942, when she was sunk by Japanese aircraft, a fate that at least left witnesses and wreckage. Yet the mystery persists because we have no physical evidence, no wreckage to examine, no survivors to interview. The ocean keeps its secrets, and the USS Cyclops rests somewhere on the Atlantic floor, her exact location unknown. The 309 people aboard, sailors, passengers, families, simply vanished from the world, leaving behind only questions and grief. For the families of those lost, the lack of closure was particularly painful. There were no bodies to bury, no final moments to understand, no clear explanation for why their loved ones never came home. The Navy's official conclusion, lost at sea with all hands, cause unknown, provided no comfort. Parents, spouses, and children were left with absence and uncertainty, a loss without resolution. The Cyclops disaster remains the single largest loss of life in U.S. naval history, not involving combat. More people died on the Cyclops than on many warships sunk in battle. Yet because the loss occurred without witnesses, without explanation, without even confirmation of when or how it happened, it lacks the narrative closure of a battle death. The crew and passengers of the Cyclops didn't die fighting. They simply disappeared, erased from existence as completely as if they had never been. The case illustrates the ocean's fundamental indifference to human life and technology. The Cyclops was a modern vessel by 1918 standards, built of steel, powered by steam, operated by trained professionals. Yet the ocean swallowed her as easily as it might swallow a rowboat. The vastness of the sea, the depth of the water, and the power of storms can overwhelm even large ships, leaving no trace for searchers to find. It also demonstrates how the absence of evidence can be more frustrating than ambiguous evidence. With the Mary Celeste, we had a ship to examine clues, to interpret theories, to test. With Flight 19, we had radio transmissions, witness accounts, a timeline of events. With the Cyclops, we have nothing but absence, a ship that left port and never arrived, vanishing into the space between departure and destination, as completely as if it had sailed off the edge of the world. The Disappearance has been retroactively incorporated into Bermuda Triangle mythology, cited as one of the region's most mysterious incidents. But as we've seen, the Triangle's reputation is built more on pattern-seeking than evidence. The Cyclops likely sank due to structural failure caused by overloading and rough seas, a tragic but explicable maritime disaster. That we never found the wreckage doesn't make the loss supernatural. It simply reflects the ocean's vastness and the limitations of search technology in 1918. Still, the human mind craves explanation, and in the absence of evidence, speculation fills the void. The Cyclops has been the subject of countless theories over the decades: sea monsters, time warps, alien abduction, and more. These theories are more imaginative than plausible, but they serve a psychological function. They transform inexplicable loss into a story, however fantastic, that provides some framework for understanding. The truth is likely more mundane: a ship pushed beyond its limits, encountering conditions it couldn't survive, sinking too quickly for anyone to call for help. The ocean claimed 309 lives in a matter of minutes, and the evidence sank to depths where it remains hidden more than a century later. It's a tragedy of human ambition, wartime necessity, and nature's power, ordinary in its causes, extraordinary only in its completeness. We turn next to the modern era, where satellite surveillance and GPS tracking promise that ships and aircraft can no longer simply vanish. Yet, as we'll see, even in the 21st century, the ocean can still swallow a massive aircraft and 239 people, creating a mystery that rivals any from history. The fateful flight, missing MH370 in 2014. The USS Cyclops vanished in 1918 when communication technology was limited, and vast stretches of ocean remained unmonitored. Nearly a century later, we live in an age of satellite surveillance, GPS tracking, and constant connectivity. Surely in the 21st century, a massive commercial aircraft couldn't simply disappear. Yet on March 8, 2014, that's exactly what happened. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was a routine red-eye flight, the kind that operates thousands of times daily around the world without incident. The Boeing 777-200ER was one of aviation's most reliable aircraft with an excellent safety record. Registration 9MMRO had been in service since 2002, accumulating over 53,000 flight hours. The aircraft was well maintained, had passed all inspections, and showed no mechanical issues. At 12:41 a.m. local time, MH370 pushed back from Gate C1 at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. The flight was bound for Beijing Capital International Airport, a journey of approximately 2,700 miles that should have taken about 5.5 hours. Aboard were 227 passengers from 14 nations, mostly Chinese and Malaysian citizens, but also passengers from Indonesia, Australia, India, France, the United States, and other countries. The 12 crew members were all Malaysian, led by Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old, with 18,365 flight hours of experience, and First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, 27 years old, with 2,763 flight hours. The takeoff was unremarkable. MH370 lifted off at 12:42 a.m. and climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, heading northeast over the South China Sea toward Vietnam. Air traffic control in Kuala Lumpur monitored the flight's progress as it followed its planned route. At 1:01 a.m., the Aircraft Communications, Addressing and Reporting System ACARS, which automatically transmits data about the aircraft's systems, sent its last routine transmission. Everything was normal. At 1:19 a.m., as MH370 approached the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace, the cockpit made its final voice communication. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Someone said investigators later determined it was most likely First Officer Farik. The tone was calm, routine, unremarkable. Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control acknowledged and instructed the flight to contact Ho Chi Minh City Control. The aircraft never made that contact. At 1:21 a.m., 2 minutes after that final voice transmission, MH370's transponder stopped transmitting. The transponder is the device that broadcasts an aircraft's identity, altitude, and speed to air traffic control radar. When it stopped, MH370 vanished from civilian radar screens. Air traffic controllers in both Malaysia and Vietnam tried to establish contact. There was no response. What happened next would only become clear through painstaking analysis of military radar data and satellite communications. Malaysian military radar, which can detect aircraft even without transponder signals, tracked an unidentified aircraft making a sharp turn to the west back across the Malay Peninsula. The aircraft flew over Malaysia itself, passing south of Penang Island, then turned northwest toward the Andaman Sea. At 2:22 a.m., it disappeared from military radar coverage. But the aircraft was still flying. Inmarsat, a British satellite communications company, maintained a network of satellites that provided data and phone services to aircraft. Even though MH370's ACARS system had stopped transmitting and no calls or messages were made, the aircraft's satellite communication system continued to exchange automated handshake signals with an Inmarsat satellite brief. Electronic pings confirming the connection was active. These handshakes occurred at 2:25 a.m., 3:41 a.m., 4:41 a.m., 5:41 a.m., 6:41 a.m., 7:13 a.m., and finally at 8:19 a.m. Each handshake provided data that would become crucial to understanding MH370's fate. By analyzing the timing and frequency of these satellite signals, engineers could determine the aircraft's approximate distance from the satellite at each handshake. This data indicated that MH370 had continued flying for more than 6 hours after disappearing from radar. The final handshake at 8:19 a.m. placed the aircraft somewhere along one of two vast arcs, one stretching north through Central Asia toward Kazakhstan, the other south into the remote Indian Ocean west of Australia. The northern route was quickly ruled out. That path would have crossed multiple countries with sophisticated radar systems: Thailand, Myanmar, India, Pakistan, China, and none detected an unidentified aircraft. The southern route over the empty expanses of the Indian Ocean became the focus of investigation. Further analysis of the satellite data combined with calculations of the aircraft's fuel capacity and likely speed led investigators to conclude that MH370 had flown south for hours before running out of fuel and crashing into the southern Indian Ocean, one of the most remote regions on Earth. An international search operation began, eventually involving assets from 26 countries. It became the most expensive aviation search in history, costing approximately $150 million. Ships and aircraft scoured 120,000 square kilometers of ocean surface, finding nothing. Autonomous underwater vehicles were deployed to scan the seabed at depths exceeding 4,000 meters. The underwater search covered 120,000 square kilometers over 3 years. They found shipwrecks, geological features, and underwater mountains previously unknown to science. But they found no trace of MH370. Then in July 2015, more than 16 months after the disappearance, a man cleaning a beach on Réunion Island, a French territory in the western Indian Ocean, about 4,000 kilometers from the suspected crash site, discovered a large piece of aircraft debris. It was a flaperon, a control surface from an aircraft wing. Forensic analysis confirmed it came from a Boeing 777, and serial numbers proved it was from MH370. The ocean had finally returned a piece of the missing aircraft. Over the following months and years, more debris washed ashore on islands and coastlines across the western Indian Ocean and Africa's east coast. A section of wing flap found in Tanzania. Engine cowling discovered in South Africa. Interior panels, cabin fixtures, and structural components recovered from Mozambique, Madagascar, Mauritius, and other locations. Each piece was analyzed, and more than 30 fragments were confirmed or deemed highly likely to have come from MH370. The debris confirmed that the aircraft had crashed into the ocean, but it couldn't explain why. The physical evidence tells us some things. The pattern of debris distribution, analyzed through drift modeling that accounts for ocean currents and wind patterns, helped narrow the probable crash location. The condition of the recovered pieces provided clues about the impact. Some fragments showed damage consistent with high-speed impact with water. Others suggested the aircraft may have been in a relatively controlled configuration when it hit. But the evidence is fragmentary and sometimes contradictory, allowing multiple interpretations. 3 main theories have dominated discussion of what happened to MH370. The first is pilot suicide. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah had a home flight simulator, and investigators discovered that he had practiced flying a route similar to MH370's actual path into the southern Indian Ocean. His personal life showed some signs of stress. His marriage was troubled, and he had recently attended a political trial that upset him. The theory suggests he deliberately diverted the aircraft, depressurized the cabin to incapacitate passengers and crew, then flew the plane for hours before crashing it into the ocean. This would explain the deliberate course, changes the disabled communication systems, and the long flight into emptiness. However, colleagues, friends, and family describe Zahari as stable professional and passionate about flying. No suicide note was found. His simulator data, while suspicious, could also represent innocent flight planning or practice. The theory requires accepting that an experienced captain would kill 238 innocent people, along with himself, an act of mass murder that seems inconsistent with his known character. The second theory involves hijacking or terrorism. Perhaps someone, passengers, crew, or outsiders seized control of the aircraft. But no terrorist group claimed responsibility, no ransom demands were made, and the aircraft's trajectory toward empty ocean makes no strategic or political sense. Investigators thoroughly examined all passengers and crew, finding no evidence of extremist connections or suspicious backgrounds. The third theory suggests a catastrophic mechanical or electrical failure that incapacitated the crew while leaving the aircraft's autopilot functional. Perhaps a fire decompression or system failure rendered everyone aboard unconscious or dead, while the aircraft continued flying on autopilot until fuel exhaustion. This would explain the long flight and lack of communication, but it doesn't easily explain the deliberate course changes detected by military radar, which required human input. The Malaysian government's final report, released in 2018, concluded that the aircraft was deliberately diverted from its planned route, but could not determine who was responsible or why. The report found no evidence of mechanical failure that would explain the disappearance. It noted irregularities in how air traffic control handled the situation and identified failures in tracking and response. But it provided no definitive answer to the central question, what happened to MH370? For the families of the 239 people aboard, the lack of answers has been agonizing. Unlike accidents with recovered wreckage and clear causes, MH370's disappearance offers no closure, no explanation, no final moments to understand. Families have endured years of uncertainty, conflicting information, and conspiracy theories. Some have accepted that their loved ones are gone. Others continue to hope for answers or even against all evidence for survivors. The disappearance has also humbled aviation's technological confidence. We live in an age where smartphones can be tracked anywhere on Earth, where cars have GPS systems, where surveillance seems omnipresent. Yet a Boeing 777, a massive aircraft weighing 250 tons, carrying 239 people, flying for hours, vanished so completely that after a decade and the most expensive search in aviation history, we still don't know exactly where it crashed or why it was there. The incident has led to changes in aviation tracking. New regulations require more frequent position reporting for aircraft over remote areas. Satellite-based tracking systems have been enhanced. Procedures for responding to aircraft that deviate from planned routes have been improved. But these changes came too late for MH370. The ocean that swallowed the USS Cyclops in 1918 claimed MH370 in 2014, proving that a century of technological advancement hasn't eliminated the fundamental challenge: the ocean is vast, deep, and unforgiving. When something sinks into its depths, particularly in remote regions, far from shipping lanes and air routes, finding it becomes extraordinarily difficult, even with modern technology. MH370 rests somewhere on the floor of the southern Indian Ocean, in water potentially 4,000 meters deep or more. The aircraft's black boxes, the flight data recorder, and cockpit voice recorder likely survived the impact and could answer many questions. But their emergency locator beacons only functioned for 30 days, and the search didn't reach the correct area in time. Now those black boxes sit silent in the darkness, holding secrets that may never be recovered. The search continues sporadically. Private companies have proposed new search efforts using advanced technology. Families continue to advocate for renewed attempts to locate the wreckage. But with each passing year, the likelihood of finding MH370 diminishes. The ocean's currents shift sediment, covering wreckage. The trail grows colder. What MH370 demonstrates ultimately is that mystery persists, even in our modern age. We can sequence genomes, explore Mars, and communicate instantly across the globe, yet we cannot definitively explain what happened to a commercial aircraft that disappeared in 2014. The case reminds us that for all our technology and knowledge, vast unknowns remain, and sometimes the most profound mysteries occur not in ancient history, but in our own time, witnessed by satellites and radar, yet still inexplicable. Having explored how modern aircraft can vanish as completely as 19th century ships, we turn next to examine the physical evidence that MH370 left behind, and what those fragments reveal and conceal about the aircraft's final moments. Clues from the ocean, searching for MH370. Knowing that MH370 had crashed somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean was one thing. Finding it in that vast expanse was quite another. What followed was the most technologically sophisticated and expensive search for a missing aircraft in aviation history, a hunt that would map unknown regions of the ocean floor, recover fragments scattered across thousands of miles, and yet still leave the central mystery unsolved. The initial search began in the wrong place. For the first week after MH370's disappearance, international assets focused on the South China Sea, along the aircraft's planned route. Ships and aircraft from multiple nations scoured the surface, finding nothing. Only after satellite engineers completed their analysis of the Inmarsat handshake data did the search shift dramatically westward to the Indian Ocean. This redirection meant precious time had been lost, time during which the aircraft's emergency locator beacons were broadcasting, but no one was listening in the right location. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau took the lead in coordinating the underwater search, working with Malaysian and Chinese authorities. The challenge was immense. The search area, based on satellite data analysis and fuel calculations, encompassed approximately 120,000 square kilometers of ocean west of Australia, an area roughly the size of Greece. The water depth in this region ranges from 1,000 to over 6,000 meters. The seafloor topography was largely unknown, with outdated charts based on satellite measurements of the ocean surface rather than direct sonar mapping. The search vessels deployed sophisticated deep-tow sonar systems, dragging sensor arrays just above the ocean floor to create detailed acoustic images. The work was painstaking and dangerous. The region experiences frequent storms, with waves exceeding 15 meters. Equipment malfunctions were common at such depths. The sonar had to be towed slowly at walking pace to generate useful images, meaning each square kilometer took hours to survey. Ships worked in shifts, maintaining the search 24 hours a day when weather permitted. What the search discovered was remarkable, though not what investigators hoped to find. The sonar revealed a previously unknown underwater landscape, extinct volcanoes rising thousands of meters from the abyssal plain, deep trenches, ridges, and seamounts. The data created the most detailed maps ever made of this remote region, ironically making it better mapped than the surface of Mars, as scientists noted. But after searching 120,000 square kilometers over 3 years, they found no trace of MH370. The official search was suspended in January 2017, having cost approximately $150 million. Then in July 2015, while the underwater search continued, a man named Johnny Begg was cleaning a beach on Réunion Island, a French territory in the western Indian Ocean, approximately 4,000 kilometers from the suspected crash site. He noticed a large piece of debris washed up on the rocky shore. It was a flaperon, a movable section of an aircraft wing used to control roll and increase lift during takeoff and landing. The component was about 2 meters long, clearly from a large aircraft. French authorities transported the flaperon to Toulouse, where aviation experts examined it. Serial numbers and maintenance records confirmed it came from a Boeing 770, and specifically from the aircraft registered as 9M MRO, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. After 16 months of searching, the ocean had finally returned a piece of the missing aircraft. The discovery confirmed that MH370 had indeed crashed into the Indian Ocean, and that debris was drifting westward on ocean currents. The flaperon's condition told a complex story. Marine biologists examined the barnacles growing on it, small crustaceans that attach to floating objects. The species size and growth patterns of these barnacles provided clues about water temperature and how long the piece had been floating. Analysis suggested the flaperon had been in the water for approximately 16 months, consistent with the timeline. The pattern of barnacle growth also indicated which surfaces had been exposed to sunlight and which had been underwater, helping researchers understand how the piece had floated. The physical damage to the flaperon was analyzed by aeronautical engineers. Some damage appeared consistent with the flaperon being in a deployed position when it struck the water, which might suggest a controlled ditching a pilot attempting to land the aircraft on the ocean surface. However, other damage indicated violent separation from the wing, more consistent with a high-speed, uncontrolled impact. The evidence was ambiguous, supporting multiple scenarios. Following the Réunion discovery, authorities appealed to coastal communities across the western Indian Ocean and Africa's east coast to watch for debris. Over the following months and years, more pieces washed ashore. A section of wing flap found on a beach in Tanzania. Part of an engine cowling discovered in South Africa. Interior panels, cabin fixtures, seat components, and structural pieces recovered from Mozambique, Madagascar, Mauritius, and other locations. Beachcombers, fishermen, and local residents became part of the search effort, scanning their shores for fragments of the lost aircraft. Each piece was photographed, documented, and sent to Australia for analysis. Experts examined serial numbers, part numbers, maintenance markings, and manufacturing details. Of the more than 30 pieces of debris recovered, investigators confirmed that at least 18 came from MH370, while several others were deemed almost certain or highly likely to be from the aircraft. The debris included both external structural components and interior furnishings, painting a picture of an aircraft that had broken apart, though the sequence and violence of that breakup remained unclear. Oceanographers used the debris discoveries to refine their understanding of where MH370 had crashed. They employed drift modeling computer simulations that account for ocean currents, wind patterns, wave action, and the physical properties of floating debris. By working backward from where pieces were found and when they washed ashore, researchers could estimate probable origin points. This analysis helped narrow the search area, though the vastness of the ocean and the complexity of current patterns meant the models could only provide probabilities, not certainties. The debris also revealed what hadn't been found. No personal effects luggage clothing documents were recovered and confirmed as being from MH370. This absence is notable, but not necessarily mysterious. Organic materials and items with air pockets would sink or degrade quickly. The debris that floated and survived were primarily composite materials and sealed components designed to be buoyant or neutrally buoyant. In 2018, a private American company called Ocean Infinity proposed a new search on a no-find, no-fee basis. They would bear the cost of the search and only be paid if they found the wreckage. Using a fleet of 8 autonomous underwater vehicles that could operate simultaneously, Ocean Infinity searched 112,000 square kilometers of ocean floor over 3 months. The autonomous vehicles could dive to 6,000 meters and operate independently, covering far more area than traditional towed sonar systems. They found shipwrecks, geological features, and even a 19th century anchor, but no trace of MH370. The search ended in May 2018. The physical evidence, the debris, the satellite data, the drift patterns confirms certain facts. MH370 flew for hours after disappearing from radar. It crashed into the southern Indian Ocean. The aircraft broke apart, though whether on impact or during descent remains unclear. Debris drifted westward on ocean currents for months before washing ashore thousands of kilometers from the crash site. The wreckage lies somewhere on the ocean floor in one of Earth's most remote and least explored regions. But the physical evidence cannot answer the crucial questions. Why did the aircraft deviate from its planned route? Who or what caused that deviation? Why did communications systems stop functioning? Why did the aircraft fly for hours into the empty ocean? Was it deliberate action, mechanical failure, or something else? The debris is mute on these questions. Without the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, the black box's investigators lack the information needed to definitively explain what happened. The search for MH370 revealed both the capabilities and limitations of modern technology. We can analyze satellite signals to determine an aircraft's approximate location, hours after it disappeared. We can model ocean currents to predict where debris will drift. We can deploy autonomous vehicles to map the ocean floor in unprecedented detail. Yet we cannot find a large aircraft in a vast ocean, even when we know approximately where it crashed. The ocean remains largely unexplored, its depths holding secrets that current technology struggles to reveal. The case also demonstrates the importance of persistence and international cooperation. Assets from 26 countries participated in the search. Scientists from multiple disciplines, aviation, oceanography, marine biology, satellite engineering contributed expertise. Private companies invested resources. Coastal communities across the Indian Ocean watched their shores. Yet despite this unprecedented effort, MH370 remains lost, a testament to the challenges of deep ocean search operations. For the families of those aboard MH370, the recovered debris provides both confirmation and frustration. The pieces prove their loved ones died in the crash, ending any hope of survival. But the debris cannot explain why the crash occurred, cannot provide the closure that comes from understanding. The fragments are evidence of tragedy, but not explanation. Of cause, physical proof of loss, without the context that might make that loss comprehensible. The search continues in various forms. Researchers refine their drift models with each new piece of debris found. Private investigators propose new search areas based on reanalysis of satellite data. Technology advances, offering new possibilities for deep ocean exploration. Families advocate for renewed official search efforts. But with each passing year, the likelihood of finding the main wreckage diminishes, and the mystery deepens. The debris scattered across the western Indian Ocean represents fragments of a larger puzzle pieces that confirm the tragedy but cannot complete the picture. They are evidence that MH370 existed, flew and crashed, but they cannot tell us why. In this way, they mirror the nature of the mystery itself. We know what happened in the broadest sense, but the crucial details, the human decisions, the mechanical events, the final moments remain hidden beneath thousands of meters of water, perhaps forever beyond our reach. Having examined the physical evidence and the search efforts, we now turn to the theories. Attempting to explain why MH370 deviated from its course, theories ranging from the plausible to the improbable, each seeking to fill the void left by absent answers. MH370 Hypotheses, Fact or Fiction. The debris tells us that MH370 crashed. The satellite data tells us where approximately, but neither can answer the question that haunts investigators and families alike: why? In the absence of definitive evidence, theories have proliferated, each attempting to explain how a modern aircraft with experienced pilots could deviate so drastically from its planned route and fly for hours into oblivion. 4 main theories have dominated serious investigation, each supported by some evidence, each contradicted by other facts. Understanding these theories and their strengths and weaknesses reveals both what we know and what remains frustratingly uncertain about MH370's final flight. The mechanical failure theory proposes that a catastrophic event incapacitated the crew while leaving the aircraft capable of flight. The most commonly suggested scenario involves rapid decompression, a sudden loss of cabin pressure that would cause anyone not on supplemental oxygen to lose consciousness within seconds. At 35,000 feet, where MH370 was cruising, the air is too thin to sustain consciousness. If the pressurization system failed catastrophically, passengers and crew would have perhaps 15 seconds of useful consciousness before hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, rendered them unconscious. In this scenario, the pilots might have attempted to descend to a breathable altitude and return to an airport, perhaps Penang, which lies along the route the aircraft actually flew. The turn back across Malaysia could represent the captain's attempt to reach safety before succumbing to hypoxia. Once the crew lost consciousness, the aircraft would continue flying on autopilot following whatever heading had been set until fuel exhaustion caused it to crash into the ocean hours later. This theory explains several aspects of MH370's disappearance: the long flight on autopilot, the lack of communication after the initial turn, and the eventual crash in a remote area. It's a scenario that has occurred before in aviation history. In 2005, Helios Airways Flight 522 crashed in Greece after a pressurization problem incapacitated everyone aboard, with the aircraft flying on autopilot until fuel exhaustion. The parallels are notable. However, the mechanical failure theory struggles to explain other evidence. The deliberate course changes detected by military radar suggest intentional navigation, not the straight-line flight expected from an autopilot. The transponder was turned off and ACARS stopped transmitting actions that require deliberate human intervention. Investigators found no evidence of mechanical failure in the aircraft's maintenance records or in the debris recovered. The theory also doesn't explain why, if the pilots were attempting an emergency return, they didn't declare an emergency or attempt radio communication. The hijacking theory proposes that someone, passengers, crew members, or outsiders, seized control of the aircraft. In this scenario, hijackers disabled communication systems, turned the aircraft away from its destination, and flew it for hours before crashing it deliberately or running out of fuel. This would explain the deliberate course changes and the disabled communications. Investigators thoroughly examined all 227 passengers and 12 crew members, looking for connections to terrorist organizations, criminal activity, or suspicious behavior. 2 Iranian passengers were traveling on stolen passports, raising initial suspicion. But investigation revealed they were simply asylum seekers using false documents to reach Europe, a tragic irony as they chose MH370 for their journey to a new life. No passenger or crew member showed connections to extremist groups or had apparent motive for hijacking. The cargo manifest raised some speculation. MH370 carried a shipment of lithium-ion batteries, which can catch fire if damaged or improperly packaged. Could a cargo fire have incapacitated the crew? Investigators found no evidence supporting this theory. The batteries were properly packaged and documented. Cargo fires typically leave evidence in recovered debris, and none was found. Moreover, a cargo fire wouldn't explain the deliberate course changes or the hours of continued flight. The hijacking theory also faces a fundamental problem: motive. No terrorist group claimed responsibility for MH370's disappearance. No ransom demands were made. The aircraft's trajectory toward the empty southern Indian Ocean makes no strategic, political, or financial sense. Hijackings typically have clear objectives: hostages, publicity ransom, or destruction of a symbolic target. MH370's disappearance achieved none of these. The third theory, and perhaps the most controversial, focuses on deliberate action by the captain. The pilot's suicide theory suggests that Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah deliberately diverted the aircraft and flew it into the ocean, taking 238 innocent people with him. This theory has gained traction among some investigators because it explains the evidence more completely than other scenarios. In February 2014, just weeks before MH370's disappearance, investigators examining Zahari's home flight simulator discovered that he had practiced a route that closely matched MH370's actual path, flying northwest from Kuala Lumpur, then south into the Indian Ocean until fuel exhaustion. The simulation ended in the southern Indian Ocean, in an area not far from where investigators believe MH370 crashed. This discovery is perhaps the most troubling piece of evidence in the entire investigation. Zahari's personal life showed signs of stress. His marriage was troubled with reports suggesting he and his wife were living separately. He had attended a political trial the day before MH370's flight. The conviction of opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim on charges widely seen as politically motivated. Zahari was a supporter of Anwar and was reportedly upset by the verdict. Some investigators suggest this could have been a triggering event. The theory proposes that Zahari waited until First Officer Farik left the cockpit, perhaps for a bathroom break, then locked the door, disabled communications, and deliberately flew the aircraft away from populated areas before crashing it into the ocean. The sophisticated maneuvers required to avoid radar detection, disable multiple systems, and navigate for hours would require expert knowledge that a captain with 18,365 flight hours would possess. However, this theory faces significant challenges. Colleagues, friends, and family members describe Zahari as stable professional and passionate about flying. He was known as a careful pilot who mentored younger aviators. He had no history of mental illness, no financial problems, no apparent motive for mass murder-suicide. No suicide note was found. His simulator data, while suspicious, could represent innocent flight planning, or practice pilots often simulate challenging scenarios. The theory also requires accepting that Zahari would kill 238 innocent people, including children along with himself. While pilot suicide has occurred in aviation history, Egyptair Flight 990 in 1999 and Germanwings Flight 9525 in 2015 are confirmed cases. It remains rare and typically involves pilots with documented mental health issues or clear precipitating events. Zahari showed neither. The fourth theory involves hypoxia without mechanical failure. This scenario suggests that something, perhaps a small fire, electrical malfunction, or gradual decompression, created a situation where the crew attempted to return to an airport but were gradually incapacitated by oxygen deprivation before they could land. The captain might have turned back toward Penang, set the autopilot, then succumbed to hypoxia before completing the emergency procedures. This theory attempts to bridge the gap between mechanical failure and deliberate action. It explains the turn back and some of the deliberate seeming maneuvers as the captain's attempt to reach safety, while explaining the long flight into the southern Indian Ocean as autopilot continuation after the crew became incapacitated. However, it still struggles to explain the disabled communication systems and the sophisticated navigation detected by military radar. In July 2018, the Malaysian government released its final report on MH370. After 4 years of investigation, analyzing thousands of pieces of evidence, interviewing hundreds of witnesses, and consulting experts worldwide, the report reached a carefully worded conclusion. The aircraft was deliberately diverted from its planned route, but investigators could not determine who was responsible or why. The report found no evidence of mechanical failure, no evidence of hijacking, and no definitive evidence of pilot suicide. It noted irregularities in how air traffic control handled the situation and identified failures in tracking and response. But it provided no answer to the central mystery. The truth almost certainly lies in the aircraft's black boxes, the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder. These devices, designed to survive crashes and deep water immersion, would contain recordings of cockpit conversations, radio transmissions, and detailed data about the aircraft's systems and flight path. They would tell us who was in control, what they said, what they did, and what the aircraft's systems were doing. But the black boxes rest somewhere on the ocean floor in water, perhaps 4,000 meters, deep in a location that remains unknown despite years of searching. Without the black boxes, we're left with incomplete evidence that supports multiple interpretations. The satellite data tells us where the aircraft went, but not why. The debris tells us it crashed, but not what caused the crash. The radar data shows deliberate maneuvers, but not who made them. The simulator data raises suspicions, but doesn't prove intent. Each theory can explain some evidence, but is contradicted by other facts. This ambiguity is deeply frustrating for families, investigators, and the aviation community. In most accidents, even when the cause isn't immediately obvious, investigation eventually reveals what happened. Wreckage is recovered, systems are examined, timelines are reconstructed, and conclusions are reached. MH370 denies us this closure. The absence of the black boxes creates a void that speculation and theory rush to fill, but cannot definitively occupy. The case forces us to confront uncomfortable possibilities. If it was pilot suicide, it reveals vulnerabilities in aviation security that the person trusted to protect passengers can become the threat. If it was hijacking, it shows that despite post-9/11 security measures, aircraft remain vulnerable. If it was mechanical failure, it suggests that even modern, well-maintained aircraft can fail catastrophically. Each possibility challenges our assumptions about aviation safety. MH370 also reveals the limits of investigation when crucial evidence remains beyond reach. We can analyze, theorize, and debate, but without the black boxes, we cannot know with certainty. The ocean has become a barrier to truth, holding information that could resolve the mystery, but keeping it in darkness and pressure that make recovery extraordinarily difficult. The theories will continue to evolve as new information emerges or new analyses of existing data provide fresh insights. Investigators will continue to examine the evidence, searching for patterns or details previously overlooked. But unless the wreckage is found and the black box is recovered, MH370 will likely remain an unsolved mystery, a modern disappearance as baffling as any from history, a reminder that even in our age of technology and surveillance, some questions remain unanswered. From the specific mystery of MH370, we return to the broader legend that has encompassed it, the Bermuda Triangle, to examine how science explains what mythology has mystified. Bermuda Triangle, Science Explained. Having examined the theories surrounding MH370, we return now to the broader legend that has encompassed so many disappearances, the Bermuda Triangle. While mystery and speculation have dominated popular understanding of this region, science offers explanations that are less dramatic but more illuminating. The Bermuda Triangle, that roughly triangular area of ocean between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, has been the subject of countless books, documentaries, and theories attributing disappearances to everything from alien abduction to portals to other dimensions. Yet when scientists examine the region, with the same rigor applied to any other maritime area, a very different picture emerges, one of natural phenomena, statistical normalcy, and human pattern seeking rather than supernatural forces. The region's geography provides the first set of explanations. The Bermuda Triangle sits atop some of the Atlantic Ocean's most dramatic underwater topography. The Puerto Rico Trench, located at the southern edge of the triangle, plunges to depths of 8,400 meters, over 5 miles straight down. This is one of the deepest points in the Atlantic Ocean, deeper than Mount Everest is tall. When a ship or aircraft sinks in such depths, recovery becomes virtually impossible, even with modern technology. Wreckage that might provide answers to disappearances simply vanishes into an abyss where water pressure exceeds 800 atmospheres and darkness is absolute. The depth alone explains why some vessels seem to vanish without trace. In shallower waters, wreckage might be spotted from the air debris, might wash ashore, or salvage operations might recover evidence. But in the Puerto Rico Trench and other deep areas of the triangle, wreckage sinks beyond reach, creating the impression of mysterious disappearance, when the explanation is simply that the ocean has swallowed the evidence too completely for us to find it. One of the more intriguing scientific theories involves methane hydrates, crystalline structures of methane gas trapped in ice-like formations on the ocean floor. Geochemist Richard McIver proposed in the 1980s that massive eruptions of methane from the seabed could explain some maritime disasters. The theory suggests that when these hydrate deposits destabilize due to changes in temperature, pressure, or seismic activity, they can release enormous quantities of methane gas that rise rapidly through the water column. The effect on ships would be dramatic. A large methane bubble rising beneath a vessel would reduce the water's density, causing the ship to lose buoyancy and sink rapidly potentially, before the crew could send a distress signal. The methane, once it reaches the surface and disperses into the atmosphere, could also affect aircraft, potentially causing engine failure if the gas concentration were high enough to disrupt combustion. Geological surveys have confirmed the presence of methane hydrate deposits in the Bermuda Triangle region. Researchers have also discovered large craters on the seafloor, some over half a kilometer wide, that appear to be the result of massive methane eruptions in the past. These findings lend some credibility to the theory. However, no disappearance has been directly linked to a methane eruption, and scientists note that such events would likely be rare. The theory remains plausible but unproven as an explanation for specific incidents. The Gulf Stream provides another natural explanation for why wreckage might not be found. This powerful ocean current, one of the strongest in the world, flows through the Bermuda Triangle at speeds up to 5.6 miles per hour, fast enough to move debris over 130 miles in a single day. When a ship or aircraft goes down, the Gulf Stream can quickly disperse wreckage, carrying pieces hundreds of miles from the actual crash site. Search operations focused on the last known position might find nothing, not because the vessel vanished mysteriously, but because the evidence has been scattered across vast distances by currents. The region's weather patterns also contribute to genuine maritime hazards. The Bermuda Triangle experiences sudden violent weather changes. Tropical storms and hurricanes form in the area, particularly during the Atlantic hurricane season from June through November. These storms can develop rapidly, giving vessels little warning. Before modern weather forecasting and satellite monitoring, ships could find themselves in life-threatening conditions with no advance notice. Waterspouts. Tornadoes that form over water occur frequently in the triangle. While typically less powerful than land tornadoes, waterspouts can still generate winds exceeding 100 miles per hour and create dangerous conditions for small boats and even larger vessels. They can form quickly and dissipate just as fast, potentially sinking a ship before nearby vessels even realize what happened. Perhaps most dramatically, the region can generate rogue waves, spontaneous walls of water that can reach heights of 30 meters or more. These waves, once dismissed as sailors' tales, are now confirmed by scientific observation and satellite data. They form when multiple wave systems converge, creating a single massive wave that towers above the surrounding sea. A rogue wave can overwhelm even large ships, striking with little warning and potentially sinking a vessel in minutes. The combination of the Gulf Stream's powerful current and the region's weather patterns creates conditions conducive to rogue wave formation. The Bermuda Triangle also experiences magnetic anomalies, areas where compass readings can differ significantly from true north. This magnetic variation is well documented and appears on nautical charts, so experienced navigators know to account for it. However, for inexperienced mariners or pilots, particularly in the pre-GPS era, these magnetic anomalies could cause navigational errors. A ship or aircraft that drifted off course due to compass errors might end up far from its intended position, making search and rescue operations more difficult. But perhaps the most important scientific finding about the Bermuda Triangle is statistical. Researchers from the Worldwide Fund for Nature and the U.S. Coast Guard have analyzed disappearance rates in the Triangle compared to other heavily traveled maritime regions. When adjusted for traffic volume, the number of ships and aircraft passing through the Bermuda Triangle shows no higher rate of disappearances than any other busy area of ocean. The Triangle seems dangerous because it's heavily traveled, not because it possesses unusual properties. Lloyd's of London, the world's leading maritime insurance company, provides perhaps the most telling evidence. Lloyd's has been insuring ships for over 3 centuries, and their business depends on accurately assessing risk. They do not charge higher insurance premiums for vessels passing through the Bermuda Triangle. If the region were genuinely more dangerous than other areas, this would be reflected in insurance rates. The fact that it isn't suggests that professional risk assessors see nothing unusual about the triangle. The U.S. Coast Guard, which responds to maritime emergencies in the region, has stated explicitly that they do not recognize the Bermuda Triangle as a particularly dangerous area. In their experience, the incidents that occur there are consistent with those in any other heavily traveled maritime region: accidents caused by weather, mechanical failure, human error, and the inherent risks of ocean travel. So why does the legend persist despite scientific evidence to the contrary? The answer lies in human psychology and our relationship with mystery. We are pattern-seeking creatures evolved to find connections and meaning in the world around us. When multiple incidents occur in the same general area, even if that area is enormous and heavily trafficked, our minds perceive a pattern. The Bermuda Triangle legend provides a framework for understanding these incidents, a narrative that transforms random tragedies into parts of a larger mystery. The legend also benefits from confirmation bias. When a ship or aircraft disappears in the triangle, it reinforces the legend. When vessels pass through safely, as thousands do every day, it goes unnoticed. The disappearances are remembered and catalogued. The safe passages are forgotten. This creates a distorted perception of the region's danger. Moreover, mystery is more emotionally satisfying than mundane explanation. A ship sinking in a storm is tragic but comprehensible. A ship vanishing into a mysterious zone where the laws of nature don't apply is both tragic and fascinating. The mystery engages our imagination in ways that ordinary accidents do not. It suggests that the world contains unknowns, that despite our technology and knowledge, some things remain beyond explanation. This is appealing, even comforting. In a strange way, it means the world is not entirely mapped and understood, that wonder and mystery still exist. The Bermuda Triangle legend also serves commercial purposes. Books about the triangle sell millions of copies. Documentaries attract viewers. Tourist attractions in the region capitalize on the mystique. There's an entire industry built around the legend, and that industry has little incentive to emphasize the scientific reality that the triangle is just an ordinary, if busy, stretch of ocean. What science reveals is that the Bermuda Triangle's mysteries dissolve under scrutiny. The disappearances that have occurred there have natural explanations. Deep water that hides wreckage, powerful currents that scatter debris, sudden storms, rogue waves, navigational errors, and the simple statistical reality that accidents happen in heavily traveled areas. The triangle is no more dangerous than any other major maritime region, and the vessels that have been lost there are victims of the ocean's inherent hazards, not supernatural forces. Yet the legend persists, and perhaps it always will. It persists because humans find patterns more compelling than randomness, mystery more satisfying than mundane explanation, and wonder more appealing than statistical analysis. The Bermuda Triangle has become a modern myth, a story we tell about a world that still contains unknowns. Science can explain the reality, but it cannot entirely dispel the legend, because the legend serves psychological and cultural needs that facts alone cannot address. The triangle reminds us that mystery and reality often diverge, that what we believe can be more powerful than what is true, and that the human need for wonder and pattern will always find ways to assert itself even in the face of evidence. To the contrary, it's a lesson about human nature as much as about maritime safety, a reminder that we are storytelling creatures who will always seek meaning in the random and mystery in the mundane. Having explored the science behind the Bermuda Triangle legend, we turn finally to examine what these mysteries, from Roanoke to MH370, reveal about our relationship with the unknown, and why disappearances continue to captivate us. The Franklin Expedition, Final Discoveries. While science has explained the Bermuda Triangle and technology searches for MH370, another mystery one we explored earlier has finally yielded its secrets. The Franklin Expedition, lost in Arctic ice for 168 years, has been found, and what the wrecks reveal transforms our understanding of one of exploration's greatest tragedies. The search for HMS Erebus and Terror never truly ended. After the initial rescue expeditions of the 1850s located some artifacts and remains, periodic searches continued over the decades. But the Arctic's vast ice conditions changed constantly, and the exact location where the ships sank remained unknown. Inuit oral history had always maintained that the ships were in specific areas, but for generations European and North American searchers gave these accounts less credence than they deserved, focusing instead on areas determined by their own analysis of currents, ice drift, and the 1848 written record. In 2008, the Canadian government launched a systematic search effort combining modern technology with renewed attention to Inuit knowledge. Parks Canada archaeologists worked with Inuit communities, documenting oral histories that had been passed down through generations. These accounts described ships in specific locations, bodies found on the ice, and artifacts recovered by Inuit hunters. The stories had remarkable consistency and detail, suggesting they were based on actual observations rather than myth or speculation. On September 1, 2014, a Canadian search vessel operating in Queen Maud Gulf, south of King William Island, detected a large object on the seafloor using side-scan sonar. The water depth was just 11 meters, shallow enough that the object was clearly visible on sonar images. On September 7th, a remotely operated underwater vehicle equipped with cameras descended to investigate. What it found was HMS Erebus, sitting upright on the seafloor, remarkably preserved by the cold Arctic waters. The discovery was extraordinary for several reasons. Erebus was found far south of where the 1848 note indicated the ships had been abandoned, about 50 kilometers from the location mentioned in the written record. This meant the ship hadn't sunk immediately when the crew left in April 1848. Someone had sailed, or the ship had drifted south after the mass abandonment. Inuit oral history had described seeing a ship with bodies aboard in this area, accounts that had been documented but not fully credited. The discovery proved the Inuit testimony had been accurate all along. 2 years later, in September 2016, the search team located Terror in Terror Bay, about 100 kilometers north of where Erebus was found. Terror was in even better condition than her sister ship, sitting upright in about 24 meters of water. Remarkably, some of the ship's hatches were closed, suggesting an organized departure rather than panicked abandonment. The ship appeared largely intact with minimal ice damage, contradicting the long-held assumption that the vessels had been crushed by ice pressure. Archaeological dives to both wrecks began carefully documenting and recovering artifacts. The cold, dark Arctic waters had preserved the ships in remarkable condition. Wood that would have rotted away in warmer seas remained intact. Metal fittings showed minimal corrosion. On Erebus, divers found the ship's bell plates bearing the broad arrow mark of the Royal Navy, glass bottles, a cannon still mounted on its carriage, and navigational instruments. The captain's cabin and officers' quarters were identifiable, though many portable items had been removed consistent with the crew taking supplies when they abandoned ship. Terror's condition was even more remarkable. The ship's wheel stood in place. Hatches were closed and secured. The galley stove remained in position. Drawers in the officers' cabins were closed, their contents preserved. The scene suggested that whoever last left Terror had done so in an orderly fashion, securing the ship as if planning to return. This contradicted the image of desperate men fleeing a doomed vessel. Instead, it suggested a calculated decision to leave the ship, perhaps temporarily, with the intention of returning if conditions improved. The location and condition of both ships revolutionized understanding of the expedition's final chapter. The 1848 note found by searchers stated that the ships had been abandoned in April of that year, with the surviving crew attempting to march south to safety. But the ships' locations proved they didn't sink where they were abandoned. Erebus in particular was found far from the abandonment site. This raised intriguing questions. Had some crew members returned to the ships after the initial abandonment? Had the ships drifted south while still afloat? Had Inuit people boarded the vessels and moved them? Inuit oral history provides possible answers. Accounts describe Inuit hunters encountering a ship, likely Erebus, with bodies of white men aboard, some in bunks below deck. The descriptions match what archaeologists found: a ship that had been sailed or drifted south with some crew members possibly aboard when it finally sank. The closed hatches on Terror suggest that ship may have been deliberately secured by the last people to leave it, whether crew members or Inuit visitors. The discoveries validated Inuit knowledge in a way that has profound implications for Arctic archaeology and historical research. For over 160 years, Inuit accounts of where the ships were located, what artifacts they had found, and what they had observed were treated as interesting but not fully reliable. European and North American searchers privileged written records and their own analysis over indigenous oral history. The discovery of both ships in locations consistent with Inuit testimony has forced a reckoning with this bias. Modern researchers now acknowledge that Inuit oral history, maintained through generations, preserved accurate information that written records missed. While the ships tell one part of the story, the remains of the crew members tell another, a grimmer tale of suffering and desperation. Forensic analysis of human remains found on King William Island over the decades has revealed the multiple factors that killed Franklin's men. Lead poisoning identified through analysis of bone and tissue samples was widespread. The source was the tinned food sealed using lead solder that leached into the contents. Chronic lead poisoning causes fatigue, confusion, impaired judgment, and eventually organ failure. Scurvy caused by vitamin C deficiency was also prevalent. The tinned food heated during preservation had lost most of its vitamin C content. Without fresh food, the men developed scurvy, which causes weakness, bleeding gums, tooth loss, and eventually death. Tuberculosis identified through lesions on bones was widespread among the crew, likely contracted before the expedition or during the first winter. The combination was devastating. Lead poisoning impaired the men's judgment and physical capabilities. Scurvy weakened their immune systems and caused debilitating symptoms. Tuberculosis attacked their lungs and other organs. Starvation came last as the men attempted to march hundreds of miles across the ice while carrying heavy sledges loaded with supplies. The cut marks found on some bones confirmed what Inuit testimony had reported, and Victorian England had refused to believe. In their final days, some crew members resorted to cannibalism. The marks are consistent with defleshing, removing meat from bones. This was not a moral failing, but a desperate attempt to survive in conditions that offered no other option. The Arctic had defeated them through a combination of bad luck, poor decisions, and circumstances beyond their control. The artifacts found with the remains tell their own story. The men had hauled boats mounted on sledges, loaded with items that seem bizarre in retrospect silverware books, clothing, soap, and other items of little survival value. This suggests impaired judgment, likely from lead poisoning, and a failure to understand the desperate nature of their situation. They were preparing for a journey, as if they were still on a ship with ample supplies, not recognizing that survival required abandoning everything except the absolute essentials. The Franklin expedition's rediscovery demonstrates how patience, technology, and respect for indigenous knowledge can finally illuminate even the darkest historical mysteries. The combination of modern sonar underwater archaeology, forensic science, and crucially attention to Inuit oral history succeeded where decades of previous searches had failed. The discoveries have transformed Franklin's story from an unsolved mystery into a documented tragedy, though the human cost remains as profound as ever. Parks Canada continues to study both wrecks, conducting annual archaeological dives when ice conditions permit. Each season reveals new artifacts and details. Researchers hope to eventually recover the ship's logs and papers, which might explain the decisions made after the 1848 abandonment. The wrecks are treated as grave sites and archaeological treasures, protected under Canadian law and managed in consultation with Inuit communities whose ancestors witnessed the expedition's end. The Franklin expedition's fate, revealed through the discovery of Erebus and Terror, reminds us that even the most prepared ventures can be undone by circumstances beyond control, that cultural prejudice can obscure truth for generations, and that indigenous knowledge, when finally respected, can solve mysteries that baffled researchers for over a century. The ships rest in Arctic waters, monuments to 129 men who sought glory and found only ice, and to the Inuit people whose testimony finally credited led searchers to the truth. As we near the end of our journey through history's most mysterious disappearances, we turn finally to reflect on what these cases reveal about our relationship with the unknown, and why we remain so captivated by those who vanish. Lessons from Disappearance. Why are we haunted? We've journeyed through centuries of disappearances, from colonial settlements to modern aircraft, from Arctic expeditions to mysterious deaths on Australian beaches. Now, as we near the end of our exploration, we must ask a deeper question. Why do these stories captivate us so profoundly? What is it about disappearances that haunts human consciousness in ways that other tragedies, however terrible, do not? The answer begins with understanding a particular form of grief that psychologists call ambiguous loss. When someone dies, even tragically, there is a body, a funeral, a grave. There is closure, however painful. Families can mourn, process their grief, and eventually, though never forgetting, move forward with their lives. But when someone vanishes, families exist in a psychological limbo between hope and despair. They cannot fully mourn because death is not confirmed. They cannot move forward because hope, however faint, persists. This ambiguous loss explains the decades-long obsession with finding Franklin's ships, the continued searches for MH370, and the enduring fascination with the Roanoke colonists. For families, the absence of a body means the absence of certainty. Perhaps against all odds their loved one survived. Perhaps they're still out there waiting to be found. This hope, no matter how unlikely, prevents the psychological closure that allows grief to be processed. Families of MH370 passengers have described this limbo as unbearable, worse in some ways than confirmed death, because it offers no endpoint to suffering. The psychological impact extends beyond families to entire communities and cultures. The disappearance of 117 colonists at Roanoke became America's founding mystery, a wound in the national narrative that has never fully healed. The loss of Franklin's expedition haunted Victorian England for decades, spawning rescue missions and obsessive searches that cost more lives and resources than the original expedition. These disappearances become collective traumas, unresolved questions that societies return to again and again, seeking answers that might provide closure. Culturally, disappearances challenge our illusion of control. We have built elaborate systems designed to prevent people from simply vanishing. Ships carry transponders, emergency beacons, and radio equipment. Aircraft have multiple redundant communication systems, GPS tracking, and black boxes designed to survive any crash. We have radar networks, satellite surveillance, maritime law, and international search and rescue agreements. These systems create a sense of security, a belief that in the modern world, people don't just disappear. When these systems fail, as they did with MH370, the failure is profoundly unsettling. Here was a Boeing 737, one of the most advanced aircraft ever built, carrying 239 people, tracked by satellites and radar flying through monitored airspace, and it simply vanished. For hours, no one knew where it was. Even now, a decade later, we don't know exactly where it crashed or why. This failure exposes the fragility of our technological confidence. It reminds us that despite all our systems and surveillance, the world remains vast and largely unknowable. Consider the scale of what remains unknown. The ocean covers 71% of Earth's surface, yet we've explored less than 5% of its depths. We have better maps of Mars than of our own ocean floor. The deep sea remains as alien and inaccessible as outer space, capable of hiding aircraft ships and secrets in darkness and pressure that make recovery extraordinarily difficult. The Arctic, where Franklin's ships lay hidden for 168 years, remains largely unmapped and inaccessible for much of the year. These vast unknowns humble us, reminding us that for all our technology, much of our planet remains beyond our reach. Disappearances also tap into our nature as storytelling creatures. Humans need narratives with beginnings, middles, and ends. We structure our understanding of the world through stories, and we find incomplete stories deeply unsatisfying. An unsolved disappearance is a story interrupted in narrative without resolution. Our minds compulsively attempt to complete these stories, generating theories, explanations, and scenarios that provide the ending that the actual facts deny us. This explains the proliferation of theories surrounding every major disappearance. MH370 has spawned countless explanations: pilot suicide, hijacking, mechanical failure, cyber attack, even alien abduction. The Bermuda Triangle legend flourished not because evidence supported it, but because it provided a satisfying narrative framework for random tragedies. The Somerton man's coded message tantalizes because we believe every mystery has a solution if we're clever enough to find it. We generate these theories not because we have evidence, but because we need completion. The theories often say more about us than about the disappearances themselves. They reveal our fears, our biases, and our need for patterns. Conspiracy theories about MH370 reflect anxieties about terrorism, government secrecy, and technological vulnerability. The Bermuda Triangle legend reflects our fascination with the supernatural and our desire to believe that the world contains mysteries beyond scientific explanation. The theories we favor reveal what we find plausible, frightening, or compelling. They're mirrors of our psychology as much as attempts at explanation. Philosophically, disappearances confront us with existential questions about identity, memory, and meaning. In our modern world, we leave extensive traces: birth certificates, photographs, social media, profiles, financial records, DNA, and databases. We assume these traces make us permanent, that even after death we'll be remembered and documented. Disappearances challenge this assumption. They remind us that despite all our records and digital footprints, it's still possible to leave this world without trace, to become a question mark in history rather than a documented life. The Somerton man lived for decades as an unknown, despite being found, examined, and photographed. Even now that we know his name was Charles Webb, he remains mysterious. We know what he was called, but not who he was or why he died. The Roanoke colonists had names, families, histories, yet they vanished so completely that we can only speculate about their fate. The 239 people aboard MH370 had lives, relationships, dreams, and futures, yet they exist now primarily as a number and a mystery. This transformation from person to puzzle is both tragic and unsettling. Disappearances also force us to confront the limits of investigation and knowledge. We like to believe that with enough time, resources, and technology, any mystery can be solved. But some disappearances resist solution. Without physical evidence, without bodies' wreckage, or witnesses, investigation reaches a point where it cannot proceed further. We're left with theories and probabilities, rather than certainties. This is intellectually frustrating and emotionally unsatisfying. We want answers, and disappearances deny us that closure. Yet perhaps this is part of their enduring power. In a world that increasingly feels mapped, explained, and understood, disappearances remind us that mystery persists. They represent the limits of human knowledge and control. They're spaces where imagination can still operate, where the unknown remains genuinely unknown. In this sense, disappearances serve a cultural function. They preserve a sense of wonder and uncertainty in a world that often feels too thoroughly explained. The families of those who disappear face a unique burden. They must live with uncertainty, unable to mourn fully or move forward completely. They exist in a state of perpetual waiting, hoping for answers that may never come. For them, the mystery is not fascinating, but agonizing. The theories and speculation that captivate the public can feel like violations, their loved ones reduced to puzzles for others to solve their grief, transformed into entertainment. This tension between public fascination and private grief is one of the most troubling aspects of how we engage with disappearances. We consume these stories, debate theories, and find them compelling, often without fully acknowledging the human cost. Behind every disappearance are people who love those who vanished, who live with absence and uncertainty, who would trade all the mystery and fascination for simple, painful closure. Our fascination with disappearances ultimately reveals more about the living than the lost. It reveals our need for answers, our fear of the unknown, our hope that even in absence we might find meaning. It exposes the limits of our control and the vastness of what remains unexplored. It demonstrates our compulsion to complete stories and find patterns even when evidence is absent. And it reminds us that despite our technology, our systems and our confidence, people can still vanish, leaving behind only questions and the haunting awareness that we too could disappear, becoming mysteries for future generations to ponder. The disappearances we've explored: Roanoke, Franklin, Mary Celeste, the Bermuda Triangle, the Somerton Man, USS Cyclops, and MH370 span centuries and continents, yet they share common threads. They challenge our understanding, resist easy explanation, and leave us with more questions than answers. They remind us that history is not a complete record, but a collection of fragments, that knowledge has limits, and that some mysteries may never be solved. And perhaps in the end, that's why they continue to captivate us, because they preserve a space for wonder in a world that increasingly offers certainty, and because they remind us that despite all we know, vast unknowns remain. As we conclude our journey through these mysteries, we carry with us not just the stories of those who vanished, but an awareness of what their absence reveals about us, our fears, our hopes, our need for meaning, and our enduring fascination with the ultimate question: what happens when someone simply disappears? Epilogue. The mysteries still remain. We've explored why disappearances captivate us, but our journey doesn't end with understanding our fascination. These mysteries continue to evolve with new discoveries, technologies, and investigations, offering hope that answers may yet emerge. As we conclude, let's examine where these cases stand today and what the future might reveal. The search for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 continues, driven by families who refuse to accept that their loved ones will remain lost forever. In 2023, researchers proposed a new approach, using hydroacoustic data recordings of underwater sounds captured by monitoring stations around the Indian Ocean. When large objects hit the water, they create distinctive acoustic signatures that travel vast distances through the ocean. Scientists suggested that by analyzing recordings from March 8, 2014, they might identify the sound of MH370's impact and use that data to narrow the search area significantly. Ocean Infinity, the private company that conducted the 2018 search, announced in 2023 their intention to mount a new search operation using even more advanced technology. Their fleet of autonomous underwater vehicles has been upgraded with improved sonar systems, longer battery life, and artificial intelligence that can identify potential wreckage more efficiently than previous systems. The company proposes to search areas identified through new analysis of satellite data and drift modeling. For the families of the 239 people aboard MH370, each new search proposal brings renewed hope, though also the risk of renewed disappointment. The families themselves have become advocates and investigators, forming organizations to pressure governments for continued search efforts and funding their own research into the disappearance. They've commissioned independent analyses of the satellite data, consulted with aviation experts, and kept public attention focused on the mystery. Their persistence ensures that MH370 remains an active investigation, rather than a cold case demonstrating how personal loss can drive decades-long quests for truth. The Somerton Man case entered a new phase with the 2021 identification of the body as Charles Webb through DNA genealogy. But knowing his name has opened new questions rather than closing the case. Researchers are now investigating Webb's life, tracing his movements, interviewing descendants of people who knew him, and searching for connections that might explain his presence in Adelaide and the circumstances of his death. The nurse whose phone number was in the Rubaiyat has since died, taking her knowledge to the grave, but investigators are examining her life for clues about her relationship with Webb. The coded message remains undeciphered. Cryptographers continue to analyze the 5 lines of letters, testing new theories about what they might represent. Some researchers now question whether it's actually a code at all. It might be abbreviations, initials, or even random letters that only had meaning to Webb himself. The case demonstrates how genetic technology can solve one mystery while revealing others, and how identification, while important, doesn't always provide the closure families and investigators seek. Franklin Expedition Archaeology continues to yield the discoveries. Parks Canada conducts annual diving expeditions to HMS Erebus and Terror, carefully documenting the wrecks and recovering artifacts for preservation and study. Each season reveals new details, personal items that tell stories about individual crew members, navigational instruments that might indicate the ship's final courses, and structural evidence about how the vessels sank. In 2019, divers entered Terror's interior for the first time, finding cabins and storage areas remarkably preserved, with artifacts still in place after 170 years. Researchers hope to eventually recover the ship's logs and papers, which would explain the decisions made after the 1848 abandonment. These documents, if they survived and can be recovered, might finally answer questions about why some crew members returned to the ships, how long the vessels remained afloat, and what the final survivors experienced. The cold Arctic waters that preserved the ships may have also preserved paper documents, though recovering them without causing damage requires extreme care. Climate change, ironically, is making Arctic archaeology more accessible. As ice recedes and permafrost melts previously, frozen sites are becoming exposed. This has led to new discoveries of Franklin Expedition, artifacts and remains on King William Island and surrounding areas. However, this same climate change threatens to destroy evidence before it can be documented, as organic materials that were preserved in permafrost for over a century now decompose rapidly once exposed. Archaeologists are racing against time to locate and document sites before they're lost forever. The Bermuda Triangle, thoroughly debunked by scientific analysis, persists in popular culture because mystery sells better than mundane explanation. New disappearances in the region still generate sensational headlines, though statistical analysis continues to show nothing unusual about the area's accident rate. The legend has become self-perpetuating because people believe the triangle is dangerous. Any incident there is interpreted as evidence of mystery rather than as the ordinary maritime accidents that occur in all heavily traveled waters. Yet the legend serves a purpose. It keeps alive a sense of wonder and mystery in an increasingly explained world. It provides a framework for understanding tragedy that feels more meaningful than random chance. And it generates tourism and economic activity for the region. The Bermuda Triangle has become a brand, and brands don't die easily, even when the facts that supposedly support them have been thoroughly discredited. Roanoke continues to yield archaeological surprises. Recent excavations at sites across North Carolina have uncovered European artifacts dating to the late 16th century, suggesting the colonists dispersed to multiple locations rather than perishing in a single catastrophe. DNA studies of regional Native American populations, particularly the Lumbee tribe, show genetic markers consistent with European ancestry, supporting the theory that colonists integrated into indigenous communities. Researchers are using increasingly sophisticated genetic analysis to trace potential descendants, hoping to finally confirm what happened to the lost colony. The Mary Celeste remains a ghost ship in legend, though her mystery was likely solved long ago. The alcohol vapor theory, that the crew abandoned ship fearing an explosion that never occurred, explains the evidence more completely than any alternative. Yet the story persists in popular culture, often embellished with details that never existed. The Mary Celeste has become a symbol of maritime mystery, her actual story less compelling than the legend she inspired. Technology continues to advance, offering new tools for solving old mysteries. Satellite imaging can now detect objects on the ocean floor in unprecedented detail. DNA analysis can identify remains and trace family connections across centuries. Artificial intelligence can analyze vast data sets, finding patterns human researchers might miss. Autonomous vehicles can explore environments too dangerous or remote for human investigators. Each technological advance brings hope that mysteries once considered unsolvable might finally yield their secrets. Yet technology alone cannot solve these mysteries. It requires sustained effort, funding, and determination. It requires respecting indigenous knowledge and oral history. It requires balancing the public's fascination with families' need for privacy and closure. And it requires accepting that some mysteries may never be fully solved, that some questions will remain unanswered, despite our best efforts. The disappeared may be gone, but they are not forgotten. The Roanoke colonists, Franklin's crew, the passengers and crew of the Mary Celeste, Charles Webb, the men aboard USS Cyclops, and the 239 people on MH370. They live on in memory, in investigation, and in the questions they left behind. Their disappearances have become part of our collective history mysteries that each generation revisits with new tools and perspectives. Perhaps this persistence of memory is its own kind of immortality. Those who vanished may not have left bodies or graves, but they left questions that ensure they won't be forgotten. Each new investigation, each technological advance, each theory proposed, keeps their stories alive. They exist in the space between known and unknown remembered, precisely because they disappeared. These mysteries endure not because they're unsolvable, but because each generation brings new determination to illuminate the darkness. We search for MH370 with autonomous submarines that didn't exist a decade ago. We identify the Somerton man with genetic technology that was science fiction when he died. We find Franklin's ships using Inuit knowledge that was dismissed for over a century. We continue to search, investigate, and question, because that's what humans do. We seek answers, we refuse to accept mystery when explanation might be possible, and we honor the disappeared by refusing to forget them. As we conclude this journey through history's most haunting disappearances, we're left with a paradox. These mysteries captivate us because they're unsolved, yet we work tirelessly to solve them. We're drawn to the unknown, yet we seek to make it known. We find meaning in mystery, yet we search for answers that would eliminate the mystery. Perhaps this tension between wonder and understanding, between mystery and explanation, is itself the lesson these disappearances teach us. The disappeared remain in that liminal space between presence and absence, between memory and forgetting, between mystery and solution. They remind us that the world still contains unknowns, that despite our technology and knowledge, some questions remain unanswered. And they challenge us to keep searching, keep investigating, and keep asking questions, because the pursuit of truth, even when truth remains elusive, honors those who vanished and affirms our humanity. The mysteries remain, the search continues, and perhaps in time answers will emerge from the darkness, bringing closure to families, resolution to investigators, and understanding to all of us who have been captivated by these stories of those who disappeared, leaving behind only questions and the enduring hope that someday, somehow, we might finally know what happened. Over the past 2 hours and 45 minutes, we've journeyed through some of history's most haunting disappearances. We began on Roanoke Island, where 117 English colonists vanished in the late 16th century, leaving only the word Croatoan carved into wood. We followed Sir John Franklin's expedition into the Arctic, where 129 men disappeared into ice and darkness for 168 years, until modern archaeology finally revealed their fate. We boarded the Mary Celeste, found sailing perfectly intact, yet completely abandoned in the Atlantic Ocean. We examined the Bermuda Triangle legend, separating scientific reality from sensational myth. We stood beside the body of Charles Webb on an Australian beach, a man who died carrying secrets, and a code that remains undeciphered 75 years later. We traced the disappearance of USS Cyclops with 309 souls aboard, swallowed by the ocean in 1918 without leaving a trace. And we explored the vanishing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a modern mystery that humbled our technological confidence and left 239 families waiting for answers that may never come. What emerges from these stories is not a single explanation, but a pattern of human experience. Disappearances occupy a unique space in our consciousness because they deny us closure. They leave questions that span generations, mysteries that resist resolution, despite our best efforts to solve them. Each case we've explored reveals something fundamental about the limits of human knowledge and control. The ocean covers most of our planet, yet remains largely unexplored. The Arctic preserves secrets in ice for centuries. Technology fails. Systems break down. And sometimes people simply vanish, leaving behind only absence and the questions that haunt those who remain. These mysteries matter not just because they're unsolved, but because of what they reveal about us. They expose our need for answers, our discomfort with ambiguity, and our compulsion to find patterns and meaning even when evidence is absent. They challenge our illusion of control, our belief that in the modern world, with all our satellites and surveillance, people cannot simply disappear. Yet they do. MH370 proved that even in 2014, a massive aircraft carrying 239 people could vanish so completely that a decade later, we still don't know exactly where it crashed or why. The search for answers continues. New technology offers hope that mysteries, once considered unsolvable, might finally yield their secrets. DNA analysis identified the Somerton man after 73 years. Sonar and underwater archaeology found Franklin's ships after 168 years. Advanced drift modeling and autonomous submarines may yet locate MH370. Each generation brings new tools, new perspectives, and renewed determination to illuminate the darkness these disappearances left behind. But technology alone cannot solve these mysteries. It requires sustained effort, funding, and the persistence of families who refuse to let their loved ones be forgotten. It requires respecting indigenous knowledge as the Franklin case demonstrated when Inuit oral history dismissed for over a century proved accurate. It requires accepting that some questions may never be answered, that some mysteries will remain unsolved despite our best efforts, and that this uncertainty is part of the human condition. History is not a complete record, but a collection of fragments. We piece together what we can from the evidence that survives, acknowledging that vast gaps remain. The disappeared exist in those gaps in the space between what we know and what we can never know. They remind us that despite our technology, our systems, and our confidence, the world still contains unknowns. Vast regions of ocean remain unexplored. The past holds secrets that may never be revealed. And sometimes the only honest answer to our questions is we don't know. Yet there is something profound in the persistence of these mysteries. The disappeared may be gone, but they are not forgotten. The Roanoke colonists, Franklin's crew, the people aboard the Mary Celeste and USS Cyclops, Charles Webb, and the 239 souls on MH370, they live on in memory and investigation, and in the questions they left behind. Each new search, each new theory, each technological advance keeps their stories alive. They exist now not as individuals with documented lives, but as mysteries that ensure they won't be forgotten. Perhaps this persistence of memory is its own kind of immortality. We study these disappearances not just to solve them, but because they connect us to something larger than ourselves. They remind us of the ocean's vastness, the Arctic's indifference, and the limits of human control. They preserve a sense of wonder in a world that increasingly feels mapped and explained. They challenge us to keep searching, keep questioning, and keep seeking truth even when truth remains elusive. And they honor the disappeared by refusing to let absence become forgetting. As we close this exploration, we carry with us not just the stories of those who vanished, but an awareness of what their absence reveals. These mysteries endure not because they're unsolvable, but because each generation brings new determination to illuminate the darkness. The search continues, the questions remain, and perhaps that is as it should be, a reminder that despite all we know, vast unknowns persist, and that the pursuit of understanding, even when answers remain beyond reach, is itself a way of honoring those who disappeared. Thank you for joining this journey through history's most mysterious disappearances. If you're still awake, there are other explorations waiting in the playlist. But for now, rest well. Good night.